Imagine this.
Ooga booga. How are you fuckers doing? Skibbity.
Why a system that was so centrally planned, monstrously inefficient, brutal, a colonial land empire could survive for so long into the 20th century?
But there are loads of dysfunctional places all over the planet that have been dysfunctional forever. And you look, well, why are they dysfunctional? And you look at, to me, the answer to that one, in a way, is the example of North Korea. You go, of all countries that should fall, a place that has ongoing famines in the 21st century, and it used to be the richest part of the Korean Peninsula. So these authoritarian regimes are really good at maintaining the coercive powers. But think about it. In order to educate someone, it takes years as a parent to bring up a little person, and then you get them educated, and maybe they're an A-list politician. It takes seconds to assassinate them. It's the asymmetry between construction and destruction. Destruction is so easy that these guys are dictators tend to be dictatorships are all over the world. It's a sad part of the human condition. They clearly know what they're up to. In the case of the Soviet.
Ever heard of the rapper Vinny Paz from Jedi Mind Tricks?
And SJWs say racism to whites does not exist.
In my opinion, the pendulum has begun to swing too far. And what does that lead to? It leads to not a little discontent and not just the right wing. It leads to...
Okay, I'll look at that in a minute. Thanks for the nation, Dodo. Shared a post linking Epstein in Israel. Okay, great. Lots of people do that.
Much larger discontent and risking the pendulum swinging back.
A controversial new piece in Compact magazine written by Jacob Savage makes the claim that beginning in 2014, classically liberal American institutions intentionally avoided hiring white men. In fact, the piece claims that some institutions even admitted that they were outright discriminating against white men. So the piece is called Lost Generation. And before we get to the details and the arguments that are made within the piece, Cenk, your 2 cents?
Well, so there's a theory that white people or males or whoever's in the majority cannot be discriminated against. That theory is false. So were there good reasons to discriminate against white men, and did that discrimination happen? Well, let's find out first, and then we'll discuss.
So the piece alleges that for about a decade,
It's driving me fucking nuts.
young white men have been systematically shut out of various institutions, including journalism, academia, and even Hollywood. Now, bear with us while we present the receipts that were provided in the piece. It's not like it was just, a big ranting article with no actual evidence. And honestly, some of this evidence is pretty damning. So Savage argues that DEI initiatives disproportionately hurt young white men who were trying to start their professional lives. So here's some data to prove it. And keep in mind that the white men represent about 30% of the American population, 30%. Okay. So in 2011, white men were 48% of lower level TV writers, obviously overrepresented, but nonetheless, 48% of lower level TV writers. But by 2024, they accounted for just 11.9%. So you can see the same pattern playing out at America's top universities.
Well, that would explain why every fucking movie and TV show that's been coming out is fucking trash. It's all like weird woke feminist propaganda and bullshit.
So white men fell from 39% of tenure track positions in the humanities at Harvard in 2014 to just 18%.
Okay, humanities are fucking stupid.
in 2023. At Berkeley, as recently as 2015, white male hires were 52.7% of new tenure track faculty. In 2023, they were 21.5%. So, of the 59 assistant professors in arts, humanities, and social science appointed at UC Santa Cruz between
Honestly, why, as a man, are you going into the arts, sciences, humanities?
2020 and 2024, only 2 were white men.
Social science, there's no such thing as social science. It's just garbage. Why in the fuck, as a man, are you going into a field like that? It's fucking stupid.
Are you tired? Did you sleep well? Also, did you work out?
I am not tired. I did sleep well. I didn't work out because my neck is fucked up. But thanks for the donation, James.
3%. And the same thing is playing out in the field of journalism as well. So since 2020, nearly 2/3 of the Atlantic's hires have been women.
And again, this perfectly explains why you hear all of this pro-fucking Hamas propaganda, all this like weird, retarded communist bullshit everywhere. This is why you see all this Me Too bullcrap, believe all women. My God.
Along with nearly 50% people of color. In 2018, the New York Times replaced its summer internship with a year-long fellowship. Just 10% of the nearly 220 fellows have been white men. So one factor that I want a little more clarity on is, look, men in general have been falling behind in the country. So if you look at graduation rates at the top at universities, period.
They literally won't hire you. Like everybody is just gatekeeping all these jobs and basically discriminating against you. Like, no shit.
You know, women are earning degrees at a higher rate than men. Is that possibly a factor that plays a role in what's happening? Could be, but that doesn't account for the fact that some of these institutions are just.
Women aren't earning degrees at a faster pace than men. They're just getting into college debt to get some bullshit piece of paper, like in some stupid, like they get degrees in like communications and shit. Like it's just nonsense.
Outright saying, yeah, we're not hiring young white men. And that is discriminatory. And I think that's an overcorrection of what, used to.
Yeah, fucking retarded. Society's just stupid, dude.
Soviet Union, there were multiple intelligence organizations. That's what Stalin was using to keep track on everyone. So you want to monopolize information so that you know more information than other people. And then they have a whole bunch of people who are the winners, the nomenclatura, are the elites there. You make sure you pay all them off. And think about it. Human societies, slaves, serfs. We humans have been doing these things to each other for a long time.
So dictatorships can certainly sustain themselves for a long time, but the Soviet Union was special in that by the 60s and 70s, they have a GNP that's 60% of America's, this incredibly dynamic economy. In the 40s and 50s, they have much higher growth rates, so much so that prominent economists like Paul Samuelson are saying that by the 90s, based on what they're seeing at the time, the Soviet Union will have a bigger economy than America. And this is just quite surprising that they would have such high growth rates. If you just think about how central planning works, people are going to tell you how much steel you can make.
Watch anything good lately? Know any good isekai?
The Netflix documentary on Diddy was really good. I was surprised by some of it. There's very good indication that he is responsible for the killings of Tupac and Biggie. Like, that guy is fucked up. I haven't seen any good anime lately, really.
I'm gonna taste you, dude. Yeah, baby. Woo! You may have seen in the news a federal jury in Michigan just awarded $4 million to a man who got his eyeball squished like a grape after being sucker punched by a police officer for no reason.
Guess what happened to the cop afterwards? They gave him a promotion.
Daniel Reef was on his way to a roofing job. He and his coworker Ryan stopped at Ryan's house to get some tools. As they walked through the neighborhood, a neighbor got suspicious. She called the police on a non-emergency number, reporting that she didn't recognize the two younger-looking kids who were walking through her neighborhood. The Clinton Township Police apparently didn't have much going on that day, so they sent the cavalry, 8 police cruisers in total, who scrambled to the scene.
8 police cruisers because some old lady called a non-emergency number saying she doesn't recognize a couple dudes in her neighborhood. Like, fuck me.
Even speeding and weaving through oncoming traffic, as if they were heading to a bank robbery. Now, when Daniel saw this, having had prior bad experiences with law enforcement, he left Ryan's house and he headed towards his bus stop. But then Officer Brock said he spotted him. He got out of his police car and he chased him down.
I'm gonna tase you. I'm gonna tase you, dude. Yeah, baby.
Whooping a battle cry as if he was a Viking about to murder some monks. And actually, Officer said he wasn't all that far off. When he caught up to Daniel, he sucker punched him in the face, which ended up squishing Daniel's eyeball like a grape, permanently blinding him. So now I'm going to introduce you to the civil.
Yeah, and the cop got a promotion. They didn't even fire him, didn't give him any disciplinary action. They just gave him a promotion. Thanks for the donation, Boopity Bop.
Why do SJWS hate whites so much, VG?
Because they tend to be the most competent and productive. Thanks for the donation, Dodo.
Why do all these officers get rewarded for doing something wrong, VG?
I don't know, man. That's just what they do. Thanks for the donation, Dodo.
And which company gets to use the cotton fabric and cement and etc. And you have hundreds of millions of people living under this system. And it's just actually quite shocking that they actually had notable growth rates after World War II for decades on end.
Well, first of all, it's a war economy, essentially. You're putting all your money, so you have a big military, and Russians define greatness. This is part of it, of being a big power, and it's military power with territory. So, and most countries in wartime have, they mobilized for the military, right? This country did it in World War II. All kinds of rationing, right? We're not using market prices. You're setting different prices, giving people ration cards and things. The thing is about the Soviets is they kept it forever. They never got rid of it. So that's one piece. Another problem with the Soviet Union is all of the data. So I don't know what data you've seen, and I know the data I've seen is it's hard to know because the ruble's a non-convertible currency, and a lot of things they measure in weight and other things. Like, they're the greatest TV producer in the world, they said. Why? Because they made the heaviest TVs in the world. Right? And I'm serious. When I was there, this was it, and they would spontaneously combust, which is...
They count their TVs in weight. So rather than claiming we make 1 million TVs a year, they'll claim we make 1,000 metric tons of TV per year. Like, what the fuck?
It's not the normal thing a TV should do for you, burn down the apartment building. So they're going to measure their heavy TVs as a positive, and the ruble is non-convertible. So there was a guy named Murray Feshbach, and I can't remember which part of the U.S. government he was, but he was really good at looking at their statistics and then adjusting them. But people didn't know, and I gave you the CIA ones, where the CIA, they're not stupid people. They've got the best data they could find, and they're coming up with 20% of the Soviet budget is probably devoted to the military. Then after the Cold War is over, they're going, whoops, we missed. It's at least double that, and maybe triple. So it's really hard to know, even with the statistics you're getting. Certainly what Paul Samuelson had wouldn't be accurate. It's just a guess.
If you enjoyed this clip, you can watch the full episode here.
Soviet Union is just crazy, wacko, backwards world. I hate how every fucking video I watch, I have to manually set the fucking.
You know,
quality.
I could get
Just United Healthcare CEO Brian Thompson. This revelation came out towards the tail end of a 3-week hearing in the case of New York State versus Mangione. This hearing it's called a MAP hearing. Typically, it happens for about half a day, maybe a day, and it's meant for defense attorneys to try and get evidence tossed out, not ruled inadmissible in an eventual trial. And there's a whole lot that Luigi Mangione's attorneys are trying to get tossed out, including the backpack search that came without a warrant, as well as statements Mangione made to Altoona police for at least 17 minutes before he was issued his Miranda rights. But this bombshell adds to a long list of, shall we say, abnormal, and that's being generous, things that have happened in this case, because apparently the Manhattan District Attorney, when he came down to the Altoona Police Department, instructed a New York police detective to record Mangione without his consent or knowledge. Kind of a problem. Because
What do you mean by they are the most competent? Are you saying that people of color are not competent at what they do, like conservatives say?
No, Dodo, that's not what I'm saying. Thanks for the donation, dude.
In the state of Pennsylvania to record without the person knowing. Let me show you. This is from a YouTube channel I've been watching from a criminal defense attorney, Andrea Burkhart, has been a lawyer for a long time. Her analysis of this, which happened just a few days ago, she describes what happened and this revelation.
Did anyone tell Mangione he was going to be video or audio taped during this interview? I do not know. We're going to pause right here. So this is happening during the cross-examination of Detective Leonardi by Mark Enyafalo. And Joel Siedemann is the prosecuting attorney. He's the ADA, I guess. I forget what they actually call them there in New York. Sometimes it runs together. Sometimes state's attorney, sometimes it's ADA. I'm pretty sure it's ADA. Anyway, he's the deputy prosecutor who is like the first chair in this case. And so we're learning he was apparently there in Pennsylvania at this time. They sit down with Luigi after he's been taken into custody, and they're going to talk to him. So Siedemann is there, gives the warnings to Luigi. Don't know if anybody told him he was going to be audio or video recorded. Well, this is going to be important. Leonardi doesn't know if Pennsylvania is a two-party consent state. Without knowing what the rules were in Pennsylvania, you set yourself up a procedure where Luigi Mangione was going to be audio and videotaped.
Then what do you mean by whites are the most competent then?
They tend to be the most competent. Thanks for the donation, Dodo.
Parentheses, without him knowing. Leonardi said he was being instructed by the Manhattan DA. So Siedemann is running the show about how they're going to conduct this interrogation of Luigi. And he doesn't know if Pennsylvania is a two-party consent state. So
Kind of a problem. Kind of a problem. If you had already searched his backpack without a warrant, had not issued his Miranda rights for 17 minutes, and some lawyers say all of this is fine and dandy. Others say this is going to be a problem for the prosecution. But now we're adding on that they added audio and video recordings of him without telling him and without his consent in a state that requires those things. It's just a mountain of issues with just the initial arrest, the way they obtained alleged evidence. I mean, I don't know. I'm not a lawyer, but this all seems highly problematic.
Rest in peace, Big Chungus.
A feline Canara, from 6 months old, drank nothing but water. Over 3 feet long, he measured 14 inches across and weighed 35 pounds. He's no chance to play and dance, 'cause fat and dance don't mix. 5 times a day, he has 3 ounces of meat and an ounce of liver. Altogether, he disposed of 1.5 tons of meat, and now he's dead. Gibson?
Okay, thanks for the donation, dude.
So Joel Siedemann is making the calls. He's instructing the detective what to do. But apparently nobody looked into Pennsylvania law for the purposes of deciding what do we need to do in the context of this interview to make sure that it is legal. Come in and out of the room.
Imagine this. You get up in the morning and you pack your backpack. And what do you put in there? You put a firearm in there. You put a bunch of cash in there. You got your man.
Really, how are whites usually more competent than people of color? Please explain, VG.
Because they wipe their butts. Thanks for the donation, Dodo.
Manifesto in there. You're ready to go. Let's go to New York City and gun somebody down. What? I have the right to do what?
Bruce Rivers, he's the criminal lawyer. Bruce Rivers, he's the criminal lawyer. Bruce Rivers, he's the criminal lawyer. And what he do? And it's gonna react to all the self-snitching.
Hi, this is Bruce Rivers. Welcome to another fun-filled episode of Criminal Lawyer Reacts. I'm Bruce Rivers, your board-certified criminal defense lawyer, coming to you with my pearl handle pistol cufflinks. Today we're talking about Luigi Mangione. You know who he is. He's the guy that is alleged, now this is not guilty until proven innocent, but not here. Just joking. Anyway, he's the one who is alleged to have murdered the CEO for United Healthcare. And, you know, there's been such a cottage industry about, you know, oh, he's the do-gooder, you know, oh, we're fucked over by the health insurance. No, this guy was a husband, a father, blah, blah, blah. You don't gun somebody down because you disagree with how they're handling their business, you know, whether it's health insurance or something else. But anyway, so we're going to get into the motion filed by the defense, you know, because they filed a motion and, you know, they've been pretty successful. They got a couple counts thrown out. But before we get to Luigi Mangione on the channel that was so crafted by the former content genius, Michael Rivers, God rest his soul, you know, I just want to bring you a message from AskALawyer.com. See how slick that was? AskALawyer.com. It's an effective way for you to get legal advice for $49. And guess what? My mug is going to be on their website. You know, it's the same people that you write e-forms and e-sign. So, for example, if you have a dispute or any kind of legal issue, for $49, you get a living, breathing lawyer. I mean, you can't beat that unless you pack your backpack. And what do you put in there? You put a firearm in there. You put a bunch of cash in there. You got your manifesto in there. You're ready to go. Let's go to New York City and gun somebody down. Think about those steps. You get on the train. You get on a bicycle. You do this. You do that. All these little things that he did. Well, a case is only as good as the people who are investigating it. And it's only as good as the cop that does the work. So if a cop breaks the law, what's the remedy for that? Suppression of the evidence. Now, their motion to dismiss, let's go through it right now real quick. Now, I have to confess here, number one, my wrist is naked. I forgot my timepiece this morning, and I don't have any glasses on, so I have to magnify everything about 1,000 times. And why was that? Because I was shoveling snow this morning. You know, there's something that's so soothing about my snowblower. and one line up, one line back, and it just cleans it up. Does that mean I'm like OCD or something? I don't know. So let's look. So they are looking for a motion to suppress Mr. Mangione. It's an E on the end, so it's A. I know that because I've been in Italy, and I was schooled by a Peruvian waiter at an Italian restaurant in Italy. In where was that? That was Verona. Suppressing Mr. Mangione's statement to law enforcement as officers failed to provide him with
Trans
Miranda.
girl lost everything over this pic. Job, only fans, Fansly. Earthing.
Just a quick update to this video from the other day where this person is filming corn with a P in the women's locker room, playing with themselves, grabbing their bulge, as well as filming OF content out on the gym floor. I followed up with this gym, Good Life.
Yeah, like normal chicks don't do this. Oh my god, dude. Does she even have like a big dick? Like if you have a tiny little peepee, what the fuck do you care if a trans chick is in the fucking women's bathroom? I don't know, yeah, I don't know who this chick is, or... It's like, if she doesn't even have a big dick, why is anybody even fucking caring?
Out on the gym floor. I followed up with this gym, Good Life Fitness in Canada. They, because of legal reasons, couldn't tell me exactly what they did with this member, which I understand, but they pretty much spelled it out that when you do something like this, you get banned from all gyms. I also talked to somebody that works there that I'll keep anonymous that confirmed with me that this person has been banned. So thank you, Good Life Fitness, for doing what's right to protect your members. This type of content has no place in gyms or any shared public space. So if you see this,
dude, it's funny how people lose their mind because somebody wanks their weenie. Okay. I thank you. You saved us. A trans girl with a little dick was wanking her weenie, but now she can't do that no more. Okay. Thanks for the donation, Blair. Like, how the fuck does this even make the news? Kenny Donny Tellers, a toonie from my brother Richard. Well, thank you, Kenny. Appreciate that. Thanks for the donation, man. Dude, that is fucking spicy. Holy fuck. That is hotter than I thought it would have been.
No warnings in violation of his Fifth Amendment rights. Here's the thing. Miranda attaches, in other words, it applies, where there's in custody and interrogation. So I sit you down. What? I have the right to do what? You're in custody, you know? You're handcuffed, you're back of a squad car, you're in... You know, I love this, you're being detained, you're not arrested. Well, fuck you. You're restraining me on my liberty, I'm arrested. The magic words you're arrested don't really apply. So if you're restrained of your liberty, you're arrested, you're in custody. You're not free to go? Okay, I'm in custody. That means, and if you try to ask me questions, you have to advise me that I have a right to a lawyer. And so if they did not Mirandize him, then his statement is suppressed. But if he gets up and testifies, they can use it to cross-examine him. Seems kind of fucked up, doesn't it? But that's what it is. Suppressing the evidence seized at the time of his arrest because law enforcement conducted a warrantless search of Mr. Mangione's backpack in violation of his Fourth Amendment rights after he was already handcuffed and surrounded by 10 police officers. Now, that's another dicey one because warrantless searches are per se illegal and against what amendment? The Fourth Amendment. Now, here's the thing. Now, they have video of him here and there and wherever. So that evidence is probably coming in. But we have...
Hi Richard. What are your thoughts on ultra-Orthodox Jews avoiding the draft in Israel, despite being the ones pushing hardest for claiming land in the West Bank and Gaza? They're the ones pushing for those policies but won't serve?
All of the ultra-Orthodox Jews I've seen are the most, like, skinny twink fucking unathletic beta males I've ever seen in my fucking life. Like, it is crazy how unfit they are. So, yeah, they should give them mandatory push-ups. And then maybe once they can do, like 25 or so push-ups, then make them do mandatory military service. Thanks for the donation.
At Diamond Gym you're not allowed to breath during sets now.
That wouldn't surprise me. They're fucking stupid. Thanks for the donation though, 21st.
have this identification by somebody at the McDonald's, right? And what is that identification based on? It's based on his eyes. And that was it. You know, is that enough? So this is going to be litigated, or it has been litigated. So the identification, you know, he's just sitting at a McDonald's far away from where this happened, you know, and it's just his eyes. So there are exceptions to the warrant requirement. Officer safety, for example, inevitable discovery. Like when you take an inventory search, like if you take a car in, for example, they can do an inventory search of the vehicle. Not really so much can be said about a backpack. What it all centers around is your reasonable expectation of privacy. Where do you have the most reasonable expectation of privacy? Where do you expect privacy the most? In your home, right? In your bedroom, but in your home. And that's sacrosanct, you know? And unless... And there are exceptions there too, like hot pursuit, welfare check. You know, if they hear a crime going on inside the dwelling, that kind of thing. And if they challenge the search of his backpack, saying that they didn't have a warrant, and there's no other exception to the warrant, then the judge could find that okay, this was all searched in violation of his Fourth Amendment rights, and why wouldn't they go get a fucking warrant? You know, we have him in custody. Let's go get a warrant. It'll take you 2 seconds to get a warrant, and all you need is just probable cause. More.
Especially in cases where it seems like an easy slam dunk. The cops always do the most stupid, incompetent shit. Always. That's how O.J. Simpson got off. Dodo, donate $2. Let me see.
England's a bastard nation and was raped by everyone. So I'm more English than you.
I doubt it, because to be English is to be Christian.
No, it's not. No, it's not.
It was. It
no,
was.
It's not.
King
no,
Alfred the Great, his work more or less words. Well, that's debatable.
The Vikings were here. They
so
were in
England. The English. We've got a crown who takes an oath.
No.
So the Trump DOJ released a random photo of Michael Jackson, Diana Ross, and their kids with Bill Clinton at an event in D.C., and redacted the kids' faces so it appeared they were victims of Epstein. This is the most insane, unhinged, retarded shit. Like, really? My God. Fucking crazy. Former U.S. President Clinton called it America's war. He believes the United States is obligated to defend Ukraine. We force Ukraine to give up nuclear weapons, cruise missiles, strategic bombers. Yep. That is true.
The Justice Department says it will continue to release more of the Epstein files on a rolling basis, blaming any delays on releasing all of the files on the time-consuming process of obscuring victims' names and other identifying information. For reaction to that and much more, Fox News correspondent Lucas Tomlinson is in Florida covering the president. Hello, Lucas.
Shannon, at least 16 files have disappeared from the Justice Department's website related to Jeffrey Epstein, including a photo of President Donald Trump one day after they were posted. It's photos of a former president that's getting a lot of attention right now. Newly released photos from the Justice Department show Bill Clinton in a hot tub with another occupant, whose face is redacted. It's not clear when or where this event took place. Other photographs show the former president with Michael Jackson and Diana Ross on a plane. Another shows this unidentified woman sitting on his lap. Clinton has denied any wrongdoing through a spokesman. They can release as many grainy 20-plus-year-old photos as they want, but this isn't about Bill Clinton. Never has, never will be. Before the photos were released, White House Chief of Staff Susie Wiles told Vanity Fair she did not think there was anything incriminating about Bill Clinton in the Epstein files, contrary to past statements made by President Trump. Wiles said the president was wrong about that. Democrats accused the White House of stalling.
So he's done everything but deliver on transparency. He's dragged his feet at every juncture this year as president.
Some think Congress has been dragging its feet when it comes to health care reform. Lawmakers departed for the holidays without a deal, with Obamacare subsidies set to expire at year's end. 4 House Republicans sided with Democrats, signing off on a discharge petition to force a vote on extending Obamacare subsidies when Congress returns next year.
It'll be a straight 3-year extension of an unsustainable, unaffordable program.
President Trump plans to
Oh, great.
meet with the major insurance companies in the coming days. In a rally in Rocky Mount, North Carolina, he also addressed affordability.
The Democrats, they're the ones that got us into the mess. They're the ones that caused the high prices. This election's about affordability.
Well, that's all nice and retarded, as you would expect.
More likely true than not true. And if this is the guy who's been identified as the shooter, well, his backpack certainly is relevant, and and there could be evidence of his identity, evidence of a firearm, and all this other stuff, his manifesto, all that stuff, and cash. All that stuff was in the bag. But if they get that thrown out, that is huge. I'll tell you why in a minute. Let's see. Precluding the district attorney's office from eliciting lay non-eyewitness identification testimony at trial. That's the whole thing that we're talking about. Dismissing the indictment terrorism-related counts, and I think those have been dismissed. Dismissing the indictment because the concurrent state and federal prosecution violates the double jeopardy clause, the 14th Amendment due process clause, and Mr. Mangione's constitutional rights against self-incrimination to meaningfully defend himself to a fair and impartial jury, blah, blah, blah. And then number 6, granting others such relief as the court deems appropriate. That's just your catch-all. So here's a picture of Mangione here at the McDonald's with a mask on. Can you tell who the fuck that is? If it really was him, which, I suppose we have to kind of assume it is for the purpose of this video, kind of crazy that somebody would be able to pick him out like that. Let's just talk about some of the facts. Patrolman... So this guy says he sees this guy, and they position themselves to Mangione's right, blocking his only exit from the table as he was already surrounded by 2 walls and a table. So in other words, they're prohibiting his movement.
Yes, sir. I do. Can you put your mask down? Yeah, sure.
The patrolman asked him to pull down his face mask, and then asked for his name. And the patrolman said, told Mangione that someone had called the police because they thought he was suspicious.
I do. Okay. What's your name? Mark. What is it? Mark. Mark? Mark what? Rosario. Rosario? Someone called, they thought you were suspicious.
Suspicious of what? You've seen those videos online where people, they're filming outside a police station or filming outside someplace, and the cops say, well, you're suspicious. Well, is being suspicious a crime? What do they call them? First Amendment auditors or whatever the fuck. I hate those fucking things. Those guys are such pains in the asses. Don't tase.
Maybe Isaac can code you an AI prediction model that automatically skips donations when it predicts any word phonetically sounds like one of your favorite banned words/names. Get him off his butt and doing some work. What does he do all day?
That's a good idea. Thanks for the donation, 21st.
Tase me, bro.
I didn't do anything. Don't tase me, bro. Ow!
So after the patrolman asked Mangione for his identification, he's alleged to have provided a New Jersey license in the name of Mark Rosario. Well, if they go run that, and all of a sudden it comes back as not him, they could tell it's not him.
Yes, if you get a membership, you can watch the past streams, you idiot.
That's a crime. And so then they can arrest him for giving a false name to a police officer. And if he would have just sat there and said nothing, he wouldn't have given him.
I don't know why most people don't understand their rights. You don't have to say shit to a cop. If a cop asks you, hey, who are you, blah, 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 you can just tell them to go fuck themselves. Like, that's it.
A foray into...
Be careful, VGSJWS might try to cancel you for saying white people are you solely more competent than people of color.
That's great. I don't care. Thanks for the donation, Dodo.
taking him into custody. So the patrolman asked Mangione if he was from New Jersey and whether he had been to New York recently. As he prepared to eat.
Arg, Trump is such a fucking creep.
Yes, he is. Thanks for the donation, Dodo.
His food, patrolman moved even closer to him and asked him what he was doing in New York before he even responded. Patrolman Detweiler asked him to stand up and put his hands on the top of his head. And then he grabbed him, lifting Mangione's right wrist above his head. And then he asked Mangione why he was nervous. Oh, yeah, I love those furtive movements.
Yeah.
I saw sweat on his brow, and he made furtive movements. What does that mean? I mean, it's just... There's another one there, like
what's your name?
patrolman. I saw the pulse
What is it?
bulging in his
Mark?
neck. I could tell he...
Why does he have the thing?
Genuinely, what does that nigger Isaac Brown do all day? He's a smart Jewish boy. He can do so much more with that intellect. As far as I know, he just plays video games most of the day and debate obscure pointless philosophy theories. Answer me.
He works. You fucking idiot. Shut up.
He was nervous by it.
Sorry. Someone called. I thought you were
Why is
suspicious.
he playing the thing in the back?
To talk to Mangione while Detweiler motioned to Fry to move physically closer to Mangione to reinforce Mangione's inability to leave. Now what has he done? He's given them a name, and we need to run this name to make sure it ain't you. Mangione was cooperative and complied with every request.
Are those lawful orders?
We don't know. Are they? That's the question. Is this a lawful order? So let's keep reading here. Patrolman Fry effectively had Mangione in his custody while he stood watch over him and blocked any potential exit. Patrolman Detweiler went outside to call another officer and tell him he was 100% sure that Mangione was the individual that law enforcement was looking for, connected to the December 4th shooting in New York City. Patrolman Detweiler returned to the back area of the McDonald's to further interrogate Mangione and asked if he was from New Jersey and what he was doing in Altoona, Pennsylvania. I mean, think about this. He's not right next door. He's in Pennsylvania. I mean, it's not that far, but it's still another state away, you know, and Pennsylvania's a big state. And whether he had been to New York City recently, even though Patrolman Detweiler had already decided that Mangione was the New York's shooter, he told Mangione as a pretext for the patrolman interaction that they were there because Mangione had been at the McDonald's for 40 minutes.
You better get your act together, boy. You best not be disrespecting me, nigger. Let's not forget you've only made $2,000 this month, and 15% of that was from me. So be a good nigger or you're getting a job at Walmart.
That's great. Thanks for the donation, 21st.
40 minutes. You know, do you know McDonald's is actually designed to make you leave? the chairs aren't comfortable. The lighting isn't fantastic. It's you're there to eat and then leave.
Yeah, I don't know why you would have stayed there. Really weird.
But it's not a crime to be there for 40 minutes. Patrolman Fry remained in his strategic position, blocking Mangione's exit as Detweiler continued interrogating Mangione. So we got a picture here. You see where he is. He's just sitting there eating his McDonald's, but he's like almost. It almost looks like an interrogation room, doesn't it? I mean, it really does. 12 minutes after they first approached him, Patrolman Detweiler moved a backpack from the floor where Patrolman Fry had been blocking Mr. Mangione's path to an area. So, I mean, what evidence do they have that he's the shooter? I still haven't heard anything that tells me this is the guy. I just think he's the guy. So the backpack was then, they seized the backpack and put it out of reach of Mangione. In the next minute, five additional uniformed officers entered the back area of the McDonald's where Mangione was detained and in custody. First of all, so what do you need to stop somebody? Terry versus Ohio. It's the oldest, well-settled law. Reasonable and articulable suspicion that a crime was committed and that the person that you're focused on is the one who committed that crime. They have somebody saying, we think this is the guy, right? A customer, or not, was it a customer or employee of the restaurant? So they go to the scene, they look at him and they say, we think he's the guy, right? We need to investigate further. So is the initial detention, this is detention no matter how you slice it, because he's not free to go. And for all intents and purposes, an initial interrogation for the purpose of an investigation is not necessarily Miranda protected. But it's not when you're told you're under arrest, it's when you're actually under arrest. The cops aren't telling him he's free to go, right? And they're blocking his exit. They take his backpack, so he's effectively in custody. When Patrolman Detweiler returned to the McDonald's at 9:45, there were patrolmen surrounding Mangione, and Mangione's backpack was approximately 6 feet away on the table. Now, and if you're confronting somebody that you would think is a homicide suspect who shot somebody in cold blood, if they had a backpack, you would set that aside, wouldn't you? For officer safety, of course you would. So they moved approximately 6 feet away. And 2 patrolmen were positioned between Mangione and the backpack. And here you see where the backpack is and where Mangione is. Now you got 3 officers in front of him. I don't know about you, but if I was Mangione, my heart would be pounding like crazy. So with 8 officers now on the scene, another officer asked Patrolman Detweiler if he had read Mangione his rights, as required by the Supreme Court's ruling in Miranda versus Arizona. When Patrolman Detweiler responded that he had not, the officer told Detweiler to tell Mangione he was officially under a police investigation and to read his rights. Patrolman Detweiler informed Mangione that he was under official police investigation, that he would be arrested for false ID if he gave the police a false name again. Well, why wouldn't he just be under arrest for false name at that point? Still, without reading Mangione his Miranda rights, Patrolman Detweiler continued interrogating Mangione by asking his name, if his name was Mark Rosario, to which Mangione responded no. So now he's in possession of an ID that's not his own, which is illegal. Unless I'm bringing my son his wallet, But that's not the case here. So Patrolman Detweiler asked Mangione for his real name and his date of birth, to which Mangione provided another officer at the scene and asked Mr. Mangione twice why he lied about his name. At this time, there were 9 officers surrounding Mangione. If there's any question about whether he's in custody or free to leave.
VG, Korean barbecue is C tier. Well, your mom's a dumb, rotten fucking bitch. You don't know what the fuck you're talking about. Korean barbecue sauce is God tier. Dumb fuck.
There's no question now. At 9:48, nearly 20 minutes after law enforcement first approached Mangione, they prevented him from leaving and asking him numerous interrogation questions. Patrolman Stephen Fox finally read him his rights. So far, I haven't heard anything else that he said. Just that, no, my name's not that, So he gave him a truthful answer there. After informing Mangione of his constitutional protected rights, Patrolman Fox asked Mangione if he wanted to talk to law enforcement. Mangione exercised his constitutional right to remain silent and expressed that he did not want to speak to law enforcement. Patrolman Fox told Mangione that he was not in custody at this point. Bullshit. It's like, are you going to believe me or your lying face? Let's see. That he was not in custody at this point, despite the fact that at the moment there were now 10 officers in the back of the McDonald's where Mr. Mangione was sitting. They had already decided 100% certainty that he was the shooter, that he was clearly in custody, and he was not free to leave. No question in my mind. So the defense is right there. I love it when cops do this. They do this all the time. So Fox ordered Mangione to stand and put his hands to the wall so Fox could pat him down, and he complied in all respects. At 9:50, approximately 90 seconds after telling Mangione he was not in custody, despite the fact of being surrounded by officers, and after he had been patted down twice, patrolman handcuffed Mangione and thoroughly searched him again. You're not under custody, but I'm going to put these handcuffs on you. It's like you're being detained, you're not under arrest. You know what? In custody is in custody. Detention is in custody. So Mangione remained standing, handcuffed, and surrounded by officers.
I don't know why cops play that fucking game. It's so stupid. You're not under arrest. You're just in handcuffs and we won't let you leave. Like, what the fuck?
As they waited for verification of his identification. Look at all these fucking cops around him. I mean, you're in Altoona. What else are they going to do? You know, chase a dog up a tree or something? At 9:54, Patrolman Detweiler walked out of the McDonald's to discuss Mr. Mangione's identification with another officer. During this conversation and without any explanation, Patrolman Detweiler covered his body-worn camera with his hand to prevent camera from recording 20 seconds of his conversation. Yeah. Now, I hate it when that happens. There's only one reason for that to happen. Did we fuck up?
Yeah.
Should we have gotten a warrant? You know, several officers began searching through Mr. Mangione's jacket and pockets and frisked him again. At the same time, Patrolman Christy Wasser and Patrolman Fox began searching through the backpack law enforcement had placed on the table. So they started searching everything. They started searching him, the backpack, and everything. What's the harm in waiting? You know, what's the harm in, you know what it is? It's a 2-year education. That's what the harm is. You ever play chess with somebody who only can play checkers? They're impetuous and don't know what the fuck they're doing. As part of the warrantless searches, Patrolman Wasser opened Mr. Mangione's backpack and fully searched the backpack, its compartments, and its contents, including closed bags that were within the backpack, while Mangione stood handcuffed and surrounded by officers who were positioned between Mangione and his backpack. So here they are searching the backpack, and now he's in custody. What could be harmed by waiting? Nothing. As part of the warrantless search, Fox retrieved a small item from inside the backpack, and that was enclosed in a cardboard and wrapped in tape. Patrolman Fox took out the knife and sliced it open. Sliced open the tape to find a computer chip inside. So here's the long and short of it. They're searching his bag. He doesn't really say much. I mean, this whole business of suppressing his statements. I mean, what did he say? He didn't say anything that inculpated himself because he's smarter than that. But this next one is.
Also, I don't care about the cope this lawyer just gave, and I don't care if the victim was a father. He was a fascist, and the only good fascist is a dead one.
Yeah, true. Thanks for the donation, Dodo. Yeah, I've already seen the Andrew Tate fight. He just got his ass kicked. Not terribly exciting. Why are you all being fucking weird?
Kind of funny. The officers continued their warrantless search of Mangione's backpack at McDonald's, even after he was removed from the restraints by the officers and driven to the precinct. So during this continued search of his at the McDonald's, Patrolman Wasser recovered a gun magazine loaded with bullets. Now realizing they had a potentially devastating mistake by thoroughly searching the backpack of a murder suspect without a warrant. Morons. Your bus is leaving. Welcome to Altoona. She suddenly stated that she was searching through the backpack at McDonald's to make sure there wasn't a bomb or anything.
They were told to do that by one of their attorneys.
On top of that, his kids will most likely grow up to be fascists just like their dad.
Yeah, probably. Thanks for the donation, Dodo. So I can guarantee you, one of the attorneys working for the police told them to say that. So they want to come up with some sort of probable cause for why they would be searching through his backpack so that this isn't an issue. These police were told by the prosecutor or something to say that. It's so fucking hilarious how incompetent and stupid the fucking cops are, dude. Like, they're just all fucking retards. None of them know how to do their job. All of them are careless. They're all just fucking retards, completely and utterly incompetent. All of them. They're all like that. Oh my god.
Do you have a bomb outfit on? Do you have one of those fucked up helmets, you know, and the, you know, the thing that makes you look like a robot? Do you have one of those on? Oh, I just want to make sure.
Did you see Andrei Arlovsky throwing those twink around backstage at the fight? Those little broccoli-headed fucks actually tried to press him. Morons. I wish he would have focused on Jack Doherty. Popped his head like a zit.
Oh yeah, I heard Jack Doherty was trying to fuck with Andrei Arlovsky. I didn't see what was actually going on. There's enough people who hate Jack Doherty where I can guarantee you, he's at risk of just getting shot. There's enough, like, crazy, unhinged wackos who watch, like, Kick. And, it only takes one of them that live close enough to wherever the fuck he is. But I can guarantee you there's, like, some crazy wacko somewhere who's thinking about just shooting him if they see him.
And while we are on the subject of kids who will grow up to be fascists.
Thanks for the donation, though, Cracker. Let me see, Dodo. Oh my god. Is this some stupid pro-Palestine bullshit? Yeah. This is all staged. Like, it's so obviously staged. Yeah, this is the son of some Hamas terrorist. They're not even good at acting. Like, it's so fucking blatantly obvious. Yeah, whatever. Israel should drop more bombs. Thanks for the donation, Dodo.
Sure, there wasn't a bomb in it, because if there was, you know, I want to protect everybody. Boom! Give me a fucking break. That's so ridiculous. I want to make sure there wasn't a bomb before putting the backpack in the car. Would that make sense?
Yeah. There might be a bomb in the bag. Let me just open it up and look around in here. Right. Why wouldn't you call the bomb squad then?
It just doesn't make sense. You know, I tried a case a couple weeks ago, and I got this cop so fucking flustered. He was just making shit up. Well, when people start going, they're making shit up. So the falsity of that comment was made clear seconds later when another officer stated, now that we found the loaded magazine, let's just bring it back to the precinct. Suddenly, not concerned about a bomb, Patrolman Wasser placed all the items back in the backpack, stopped searching, and Wasser repeated her comments that she was just trying to make sure that there wasn't a bomb in the backpack, as another officer commented that at this point, we probably need a search warrant. That's what we call an admission. I mean, can you imagine the cross-examination of this cop? Well, you thought there was a bomb in there, right? So you called the bomb squad, right? No, you didn't. Well, you certainly, evacuated the entire McDonald's because you didn't want anybody else to blow up, right? Oh, you didn't? Well, you certainly went for officer safety, and you told everybody else to get back because you were going to just hop on the fucking backpack and you were going to take it for the team, right? Oh, that wasn't true either. Huh. Guess you're kind of fucked on that one, aren't you? The reason I'm reading this all to you is so you can get the sense of what the judge is considering, okay? I know this is kind of tedious, and it's not really tedious. It's interesting to figure out.
Just look at the channel for that video I just showed you. It's full of this bullshit.
Yeah. Just fucked hard. I love how they got... Yeah, it's just a fucking Nazi channel. They literally have Dan Bilzerian on it. Like, give me a fucking break. Thanks for the donation, Dodo.
What they were actually doing at the time. And my God, this defense is, I guarantee you there's nothing you can assail on the defense from their presentation of what these facts are. Because this is all from the reports, all from the squad, or the body cams, all from, you know, what actually happened. So Patrolman Wasser left McDonald's at 10:04 a.m. There is no body-worn camera footage from her for the next 11 minutes as she drives to the precinct with a backpack that she didn't get a warrant for. And 1 minute after arriving at the precinct, Patrol Wasser continued their warrantless search of the backpack. Why the fuck would you do that? If I'm the prosecutor, I would be so pissed at these cops. Patrolman Wasser first reopened the same backpack compartment that she had, started searching at the McDonald's before immediately closing the compartment and opening the front compartment of the backpack as if she was specific.
Axel is making a vegan ham for Christmas. Have you ever had a vegan ham? Yes. How are you feeling nowadays? Fine. Feeling fine. Thanks for the donation, Aaron.
Looking for something. Instantly, she found a handgun in the front compartment. Guess what? You know, they have the caliber of the bullet. If this is suppressed as evidence, what a colossal fuck-up. What a colossal fuck-up for both the state and federal prosecutions. After finding the gun at the precinct,
I really hope they don't allow this to be in as evidence. That'd be hilarious if this guy just gets off. There's actually other issues, apparently, with chain of custody. I think Luigi Mangioni's lawyers have already pointed out there isn't a clear chain of custody when it came to some of the evidence that was gathered, like the handgun they supposedly found inside his car.
Patrolman Wasser again explained to another officer that she quickly searched the bag at McDonald's to make sure there was no bomb in there. Patrolman Wasser did not explain why she did not seek a warrant once she had arrived at the precinct. I can understand a quick cursory search to make sure there wasn't anything super dangerous initially, but go get a warrant. You now have it in your custody, right? And you know there's no bomb in there. You knew there was no bomb in there when you put it in your fucking car. Why not get a warrant? What's to be lost? Your curiosity. Patrolman Wasser continued to search the backpack at the precinct without a warrant and recovered a silencer. These are all fucking big, huge items of evidence. And if they're suppressed, I mean, get another job. You know, Walmart is hiring a greeter. A red notebook containing Mr. Mangione's personal writings. So you got a magazine with bullets in it. You got a firearm. You got a silencer. And now you got a manifesto. But you couldn't get a warrant for it because you're in Altoona. Oh my God, this has just killed me. The warrant application sought permission to search and seize the items from Mr. Mangione's backpack that law enforcement had already searched several times and seized earlier that morning. Now, if you don't disclose to the judge when you're getting this search warrant that you've already searched it, the gun's already out of the bag, for lack of a better word.
Tonight, new images of what police found on Luigi Mangione released to the public for the first time, including photos of thousands of dollars of cash he was carrying, including foreign currency, apparently from Asia, his laptop, which he was using when police approached him in the McDonald's, along with a small flashlight
When do you think high-powered sex robots will hit the market? I am tired of waiting.
I'm not entirely sure. Really don't know. So, wouldn't be able to tell you. Thanks for the donation, though, Katakuri.
And a Sharpie and a mask. And for the first time, we're hearing the 911 call that alerted police he might be there.
Blair 911, what is the address of your emergency? It's not really an emergency. I'm a manager at Plank Road McDonald's out here
It's not really an emergency.
on the boulevard. Okay. And I have a customer here that some other customers were suspicious of, that he looks like the CEO shooter from New York. Okay. So they're just really upset, and they're like coming to me, and I was like, well, I can't approach them, you know. No, of course not. All right, honey, what's your name?
One of the
So if you get a bunch of customers coming to you and then you call 911, certainly the cops are within their rights to investigate. You know, if you get a call, let's say you leave the bar and you're shit-faced drunk and you're driving down the road and the cops get an anonymous caller, right? They get an anonymous caller saying, I just saw this car. He's driving drunk all over the road. But that caller's unidentified. That's not enough to pull you over. But if the person identifies who they are and they give specifics, then the cops can use that. They certainly, now they know who the caller is, right? They're identified, and you only need reasonable articulable suspicion. And so I think they're within their rights to talk to him, to question him, and then he gives them a fake name. Well, that's a problem. That's a problem for the defense. Going beyond that, what's the next step? Taking the backpack aside and looking in real quick to make sure there's no bomb in it, I think that's probably okay, just to make sure. But to actually search it and find all the shit they did without a warrant, I don't think is okay.
The responding officers testified he arrived at the McDonald's doubting it was the suspect in the United Healthcare CEO's murder.
What? He doubted it was.
But told the court when he lowered his mask, he knew immediately it was him. Meanwhile, in court today...
So I think they're okay to arrest him. I think they're okay to do everything they did. With the exception, I mean, so it doesn't sound like he really gave any information that was inculpatory. But if you look at it...
I don't know if they're actually going to suppress the evidence, like, in the case. It may happen, may not, but one huge issue is... Generally speaking, they won't suppress evidence in a case if it's assumed that this evidence would have been discovered anyway. So, even if they violated his Fourth Amendment rights and searched his bag unlawfully, if it would have turned out that they would have found the evidence anyway, it doesn't matter. So... that's probably going to be a big issue for his lawyers. I don't know if the judge is going to totally buy it, that this evidence wouldn't have ever otherwise been found. I'm sure his lawyers are going to try to come up with some argument for it. But yeah, if they actually successfully suppress the evidence in the case, holy mother of a fuck, dude. That is hilarious. So they have no confession, nothing about him admitting any guilt. All they have is a photo of his chin, basically. And I don't know if they have any, like, cell phone data or some shit like that, where, like, it's obvious he was in the area, but... like, it would be so easy to provide reasonable doubt. That's all the defense has to do. All they have to do is provide reasonable doubt. So, that would be funny as fuck if he gets off because these cops are so fucking stupid.
This mask, and you know that it's him? Jesus, motherfucking Christ. Go get a warrant for the backpack. I mean, that's not that hard.
Prosecutors revealed what the police discovered on Mangione the day he was arrested, including a USB drive on a chain around his neck, an apparent to-do list that included buying a survival kit, trash bags, and more USB drives, and in his back pocket a Greyhound bus ticket from Philadelphia to Pittsburgh, arriving the night of the murder. Mangione has pleaded not guilty to both federal and state murder charges. His arrest and the search that followed the central focus of this week's pretrial hearing. The defense looking to get evidence, including the alleged murder weapon thrown out before the upcoming trial.
First of all, they got the terrorism stuff thrown out. And I think there's a good likelihood that they can get the stuff in the backpack maybe thrown out. I mean, look at the stuff that they found. They seized the laptop. They would certainly have to get a search warrant for the laptop. And they would get it. It's not hard to get. What do you need for a search warrant? Probable cause. Slightly more true than not true. Just a little bit. The standard is pretty low. This is a treasure trove of evidence. And you think this is the shooter. So Patrolman Wasser, what the fuck? Why wouldn't you wait to get a warrant? I mean, do you tell people what their presents are before Christmas? I bet you do, because you just can't help it.
David, has there been any argument made by the defense thus far that you believe would warrant evidence being tossed out in this case? Any of it?
No, that's a great question. And I think the answer is maybe. Yes. Listen, there's a lot of things that the defense is bringing up, and they're bringing up some valid points.
I love this guy, but I don't love his jacket.
Biggest thing, in my opinion, that the defense is bringing.
Yeah, Jesus, what the fuck? Why do people wear some of the most silly, stupid shit?
Bringing up is that the police were questioning him, and Mangione in the beginning said, I don't want to answer any more questions. Well, once that happens, the police, they need to shut up. They shouldn't talk anymore. They shouldn't ask any more questions unless Mangione brings it up again. Then they can ask questions. That would be the biggest thing, in my opinion. So any statements that
the biggest thing is the backpack
Mangione made, I think that may be suppressed. But the other evidence that is being trying to be suppressed by the defense, like the gun and the plans that he had in his backpack, that kind of stuff, that I think they're going to have a little more difficulty in the suppression motion.
Understood. So no trial date set as of yet. This timeline depending heavily on the ruling. Based on what you've heard inside of the courtroom, do you get a sense of a timeline?
The backpack, I think, is the bigger issue. I don't think he made any statements that really are... I mean, him giving a false name, so what? I mean, that does help because it shows consciousness of guilt, right? It shows that he's concealing his identity. But what the hell? Why didn't you get a warrant for this backpack? It would have just solved your issue. So now let's just take a look at this horrific video.
Isn't this like fairly safe to play on YouTube? I don't know. Well, maybe it's for monetization. Pretty sure like plenty of people have uploaded the video and nobody got a strike.
I mean, this is murder one. This is just murder one. No question about it. I mean, he takes off, and this dude is on the ground. I'm not going to play the whole thing, but he's on the ground for over 4 minutes. People walk up to him and see him. Just another drunk. It's New York City. So this is an interesting case. A lot hinges on this motion. Without that backpack, and without any of his inculpatory statements, which I don't know that I can't understand what the worst thing he said was. And that lawyer was right. The minute you invoke Miranda, they're supposed to stop talking to you. The minute you say, I don't want to talk to you, they're supposed to stop all communication. But when you look at this, you have one, look at it this way. You have two different trials. A trial with the backpack, a trial without the backpack. Trial with the backpack, fucking put a fork in him, he's done. Without the backpack, he's got a fighting chance. And that's why this motion is so incredibly pivotal on how this case is going to turn out. So that's our little reaction to the recent Mangione, that's the proper way you say it, case in New York City. And we'll
This is some unhinged shit.
Everyone, welcome to Washington Gun Law TV. I am Washington Gun Law President William Kirk. Thanks for joining us. Hey, earlier today, I sent a little tweet out about this incident that's been running rampant out there in the Twittersphere, Exosphere, whatever we're calling it this week. And it involved these two female police officers outside of Houston.
Yep, female police officers. You know where this is going.
Houston, who went to a burglary call and then just decided to dump their magazines into the home and upon the homeowner. Now, this continues a disturbing trend that we've seen in the last couple of weeks where officers have frankly just been a little too trigger happy. Let us remember the Acorn incident from 2 weeks ago. But one of my loyal viewers had a fantastic question, and it was a question I answered for him, and then I thought, dang, that would probably make a pretty good video. So I ran down here to the gun club right away because I want to get this out to you. So what we're going to do today is we're going to talk about laws of self-defense. We're going to run through some hypotheticals, and it's a crazy hypothetical, but it's one that unfortunately, as we've seen now, could actually happen. So today, let's spend a few minutes and let's talk about if the cops are unlawfully shooting at me, can I shoot back? Okay, so we're going to go to Houston, Texas, because as you probably have heard, a couple of police officers were called to a residence for a potential home burglary. The home burglary actually turned out to be the homeowner who had broken a window to get inside of her own home when she locked herself out. Now, the police, after circling the perimeter of the building and finding nothing amiss, decided that they would actually go up and knock on this person's door. Now, this is in the middle of the night. This woman lives alone. This is the state of Texas. And so I think that a lot of us, if there was pounding on the door, or we knew that somebody was on our front porch in the wee hours of the morning and were armed, might want to arm ourselves and just go check and see what's happening at the front door. Unfortunately for this woman, when she came into the officer's view holding a gun, the following ensued.
That's right. These two female police officers had the brilliant idea of banging on this woman's front door in the middle of the night without announcing that they're police officers and they're in the state of Texas. And they're surprised that someone would come looking at their door with a gun when somebody's pounding on their front door at the middle of the night. Yeah. This fucking bitch just unloads immediately. Doesn't say, hey, stand back, put the gun down, we're the police, doesn't retreat, just immediately unloads. This person didn't even shoot at them. Didn't make any gestures that she was gonna shoot. Fucking unloads immediately. That's female cops for you. Reload, dump some more ammo, make sure you kill some innocent people.
Shot fire, shot fire.
Could you imagine? Like, holy fuck, dude. Yet two women. Dude, I'm surprised they didn't shoot each other. Holy fuck. just unhinged. Absolutely fucking unhinged.
Okay, the homeowner, Emily Pouncey, who was lawfully inside her own residence at that time, was struck multiple times. She sustained very serious injuries. They are non-life-threatening, however. She is expected.
Yeah, so here's a pro tip, since the cops are, like, out of this world fucking retarded, and they might be stupid enough to knock on your front door and not announce themselves in the middle of the fucking night. Just don't answer the door. Never, ever answer the door. Then problem solved. You won't get shot at by police for just existing. So, yeah, just don't answer your door.
To make a full recovery. I'm sure the plaintiff's lawyers are lining up right now to represent her. But this begs the really interesting question, which is, if, God forbid, you would be involved in a situation where law enforcement officers are unlawfully firing upon you, do you have the right to shoot?
Oh, yeah, that's going to be a several $1 million settlement, guaranteed. Like, that's got to be at least $1 million, but I'm guessing like $2 million settlement easy. There's been quite a few multi-million-dollar settlements recently. There was one that was over like $5 million recently, where that kid got shot for no reason. There's the one that we just looked at where the guy got his eyeball smashed, like squished. There's the train one that was multi-million. There's been a lot of multi-million-dollar lawsuits against the fucking police recently.
Shoot back. Okay, so to understand that, we're going to have to go through all of our foundational and general rules of self-defense. So here we go. We know in almost every jurisdiction in the United States that the force we use to defend ourselves must be 1, necessary, 2, reasonable, both objectively and subjectively, and 3, proportional. All right. We also know that we cannot use lethal force unless we are in imminent threat of death or serious bodily injury. And if you really break down all of the case law from around the country, you will see that there's essentially 4 instances in which individuals are allowed to lawfully use lethal force. Number 1, you are in imminent threat of death or serious bodily injury. Number 2, someone else in your presence is in imminent threat of death or serious bodily injury. Number 3, you have a felony being committed upon your person. Or number 4, you have a felony being committed inside your home. Under any one of those 4 circumstances, you will, in most instances, be allowed to use lethal force. Let us also remember that Texas, like many, many other states, has a no duty to retreat, a castle doctrine, a stand your ground, whatever you want to call it, which basically says, listen, so long as you are lawfully located in that spot, you are under no legal obligation or duty to retreat. This woman, Miss Pouncey, is actually in her own home. And then finally, let us remember that under the first aggressor standard, if we are the first aggressor, that is the one that actually provokes the altercation, we cannot then later claim self-defense. Now, I find it very hard to believe that Miss Pouncey here was the first aggressor when she actually just broke into her own home. She is committing no criminal activity whatsoever when law enforcement arrives. She's going to have to replace a window, but that's her own doing, okay? She, from all accounts, is lawfully armed. She has every right in the world to be armed inside. Was done without any lawful authority, and therefore Miss Pouncey at this point is encountered with unlawful lethal force that is being used against her. Is she in imminent threat of death or serious bodily injury? Yes, and if at the very least Miss Pouncey has at least 3 reasons to defend herself using lethal force. Also, our acorn incident. After this officer was shot and taken down by an acorn, he started firing upon his own patrol car with a suspect in there. Now,
yeah, that was crazy. Fucking acorn.
If, and I know this is a crazy hypothetical, but if that suspect was in the back of the patrol car and able to arm themselves, would they have been lawfully allowed to return fire? The answer is yes, they would have, because they were encountered with unlawful lethal force being used against them. So the bottom line is if you are encountering unlawful lethal force or any force that places you or other people in your presence in danger of death or serious bodily injury, you are lawfully permitted to use lethal force in defense of yourself and others. Now, I want everyone to recognize the limitations of this video. This video is entitled, "If Cops Are Unlawfully Shooting at Me, Can I Shoot Back?" The video is not entitled, "If Cops Are Unlawfully Shooting at Me, Should I Shoot Back?" Those are questions.
Don't know if this is worth watching, but let's check it out.
Carnivore influencers are running from carnivore faster than they run from plants. All right, so I'm always open for people changing their views on stuff, but I think it requires you to change your views with intellectual honesty. And there are a lot of carnivore influencers who are no longer carnivore, but I'm gonna pull up a video and we're gonna talk about it. So let's see what we have to say about some of these carnivore folks who are no longer carnivore.
All of your favourite carnivore influencers are running into the same health issues, and here's the proof. First, let's have a look at carnivore Cam. He's now borderline diabetic. But Cam's not the only one. Carnivore Ray is at a similar point.
Is this really true? Broccoli heads back. All right, before we get into him, first of all, yes, they've shown their blood work and it's suboptimal. And this reminds me of when I debated Sean Baker back in 2018. His blood work showed his blood glucose was over 120. Like his fasting blood glucose was over 120, if I recall correctly.
That is crazy high.
That is like type 2 diabetic. And then you had Paul Saladino, who was carnivore, and then came out and said, I'm actually not totally carnivore anymore. Now I'm this moving the goalpost of animal-based. Then you've got Dr. Kiltz. Now, before we get into Broccoli Head here, let's go and roll the tape on what Dr. Kiltz just said.
Dr. Kiltz here. And you know, I've been Mr. Crazy Carnivore for nearly 15 years. We've seen some people leave us in this world, and maybe in a very polarizing way. Leading as a carnivore and only eating meat maybe was a little too polarizing. And recently I've also had a test that showed my CAC score went from 700 to 800.
Whoa!
That is a very bad score to begin with, but for that to increase that quickly in a short time span is just crazy.
Calcium score. First off, it was...
Clav smashed and dashed a girl on her birthday, lol.
I remember like last summer, I fucking went to these chicks' Airbnb and I won a 1v8, right? There's 8 of these chicks like trying to fucking like, you know, like shit test me. I still beat them all. I was like convincing them like, oh, I wasn't just there to fuck. I fucked this bitch. Then literally after 5 seconds, I said, yo, my bad, I nutted in you. I gotta go get a plan B for my car. I skirted off in that hoe so fast, bro. I was so out of, and it was her birthday too. It was a fucking bitch's birthday. And I was out of there like you wouldn't believe.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of funny how he calls women like whores if they ever have sex, but then like he does this. Thanks for the donation though, nigga. Appreciate it.
Was at 700. That's freaking enormous. 800? I don't know what the answer is going to be this. Let's see what Google says about a coronary calcium score of 800. A coronary calcium score of 800 indicates significant plaque buildup in the coronary arteries and a high risk for a future heart attack or other cardiovascular event. It signifies more extensive coronary artery disease than a score of 400 or less, suggesting aggressive management is needed, including a detailed discussion with a healthcare provider about potential treatments, medications, and lifestyle changes. This score falls into the severe category, meaning there is a considerable amount of calcified plaque in the arteries that supply blood to your heart. Your doctor will likely recommend a comprehensive plan that may include cholesterol-lowering medications like statins, blood pressure management, and a focus on healthy lifestyle changes. Okay, so basically, with a coronary calcium score of 800, you're at imminent risk of a heart attack. He kind of casually mentions this. 800 is enormous. Enormous! You know, by the way, this doesn't count all the carnivores out there who've actually had heart attacks, who have been blackballed from their own community, because as soon as they say, hey, I was on carnivore and I had a heart attack, people say you must have been eating seed oils or it's oxalate dumping, which everything is oxalate dumping. Everything. Your kid got an F in school, oxalate dumping. Lost your job, oxalate dumping. Like anything that goes wrong in these people's lives, it's oxalate dumping. Like it's an absolute joke. Let's go back to what Dr. Kiltz was saying.
Angiogram noted a few more plaque sites with calcium in my LAD, in my right coronary artery, and in my circumflex.
This guy is not long for this world.
Although my heart function and my blood flow is excellent, I feel great. I recently suffered from some acute colitis. I don't know what it was.
Colitis. Imagine that. Inflammation of the colon, not eating any fiber. Who woulda thunk it? I would. I'm going to stop here because, first of all, I've debunked Dr. Kiltz before. I had a very awkward interaction with him at a conference a few years ago. I don't wish anyone to have a heart attack. Nothing like that. It doesn't make me happy to see this. It doesn't. I make a video pointing this out because it is a cautionary tale for people. This dude, Paul Saladino, these other people, carnivore was their identity. Do you realize how sick, how bad you have to be feeling, or how scared you have to be to change your identity when you've built your entire livelihood around it? I want you to think about that for a moment. That means these folks are scared. And frankly, they should be. They should be. So all that to say, I wish Dr. Kiltz well. I hope he gets treatment, and I hope he never has a heart attack. Hope
he fucking drops dead. Hope he drops dead while he's driving his fucking family to the Grand Canyon. Just has a massive fucking stroke or something, right when he's on the edge of the cliff with his entire family in the fucking vehicle. Guy's a scumbag. All these people are fucking scumbags. Hope they eradicate themselves. Just keep eating shit.
Things work out for him. And I hope he also starts telling people, hey, this may not be the best thing. So now he's going to eat some plants. Who would have thought? I thought plants made you infertile. Anywho, so let's go back to Broccoli Head and see what he has to say.
Does the carnivore diet actually cause diabetes? Type 2 diabetes has one single definition: prolonged elevated blood sugar levels. Prolonged meaning constantly elevated. The two main tests used to check for this are: one, fasting glucose, which is how much sugar is in your blood before you,
which by the way, a lot of carnivores have elevated
before you've eaten that day. And secondly, HbA1c, which put very simply tracks how much sugar damage has built up on your red blood cells. In regards to fasting glucose,
it's not exactly what it tracks. So your blood cells have hemoglobin in them. Your red blood cells have hemoglobin in them. Hemoglobin has areas where it can bond with glucose, so it can be glycosylated. And the amount of glycosylation is a direct reflection of the amount of glucose that your blood is exposed to over time. So HbA1c is actually a very good marker of what your bloodstream is seeing consistently in terms of concentrations of glucose. Because your actual blood glucose levels go up and down pretty regularly. But the thing about HbA1c is red blood cells take about 90 to 120 days to turn over. So what is on there, the amount of glycosylation, is very reflective of long-term concentrations of what you're exposed to over 24-hour periods in terms of your blood sugar, and actually over several months. So HbA1c is actually a really great and sensitive measure of what's actually going on in terms of your long-term exposure to blood glucose.
Carnivore raised fasting glucose is 96 milligrams per deciliter, and carnivore cams is 93.6 milligrams per deciliter. Anything under 100 is considered normal, so there's no issues here. But in regards to HbA1c, it's slightly different. Raised is 5.5%, which is still within the normal range, but cams is actually 5.7%, which technically speaking falls into the quote pre-diabetic range. But here's the thing.
Well, I thought these guys all said glucose should be as low as possible. Now he's being like, oh, well, actually these slight normal elevations of blood glucose, those are totally fine. But I thought we were trying to keep glucose as low as possible. It's funny how
they always shift the goalposts.
How the script flips whenever the evidence doesn't support what they want.
HbA1c is measuring is sugar damage done to a red blood cell across its entire lifespan. So your HbA1c reading is strong.
No, once again, it's measuring the amount of glycosylation over its lifespan, but pesky details.
Strongly dependent on how long your red blood cells live for. The longer they live, the more time they have to accumulate sugar damage, even if your blood sugar is normal. Now, what happens on a carnivore diet is your inflammation drops. Your cell membranes, the outer protective layer of your
Oh my god, he's saying a carnivore diet reduces red blood cell turnover. Literally no evidence for his claim.
Cells, they strengthen, and your blood sugar is stable, all of which are the main factors which cause a red blood cell to live longer. So rather ironically, being healthier has the potential to actually make your HbA1c look worse.
Unk is just saying anything now.
I don't go to the gym to fucking just battle demons. I am a fucking demon. When I showed up on stage to the Olympia, they're like, you came in too buff. You came in too shredded. I brought the best physique out here. And they're like, you know, you did. But today we were looking for... By the way, fuck you, Tamer. Tamer is one of the main judges. Fuck that guy. Yeah, unless you're funding him, giving him money under the table.
This guy never competed in bodybuilding. This is weird. Thanks for the donation, nigga.
I have been vegan for 9 years and by resting blood glucose is 59, reference range is between 60 and 100, doc says that is fine. Thoughts? Now tell me what 3D printer Isaac got.
Yeah, that's fine. Isaac has not gotten a 3D printer yet. Thanks for the donation, though, retard. Appreciate it. Weird.
And this isn't some made-up theory, it's backed by peer-reviewed studies. Researchers have clearly shown...
Wait, I thought these guys say that research doesn't matter, it's all bought and paid for, and you can't trust the science. Oh, wait, you just can't trust the science that shows something they don't like. But when it comes to the science of stuff they do like, then it's beyond reproach.
Two people with the same HbA1c can have totally different blood sugar levels and health statuses, depending on how long their red blood cells live for. This is a very well-known limitation of laboratory HbA1c reading. So is Cam actually pre-diabetic?
In the words of Tom Segura, hold on a second. So he's basically saying, oh, the reason these levels are artificially elevated is because when this person switched to carnivore from what they were doing, their HbA1c was high because of what they were doing previous. But now, since they've been doing carnivore and their inflammation is going down, which, by the way, there's absolutely no evidence that carnivore decreases inflammation. But since their inflammation is going down, now their red blood cells are healthier and living longer. And he cited a study, and I'm going to go back and I'm going to read you exactly what it says. In this cohort, which, by the way, they also say cohort data is garbage. Paul Saldino says it all the time, but I digress. In this cohort, 69% of subjects were within red blood cell lifespan of 93 to 123 days, while 30% had a red blood cell lifespan below 93 days, and 2 subjects had above 123 days. Okay, so what we're looking at is the difference of about a month. Over 70% of people, it's a difference of about a month. The people that had red blood cells that lived shorter than 90 days versus those that had those that lived longer than 120 days, it wasn't like months and months and months. We're talking about the difference on average of the most extreme 1 month, okay? And then of the outliers, we're talking about a few more days, week in the other direction. So let's just be generous and say, okay, between healthy red blood cells and the most putrid red blood cells you've ever seen, you're talking about 2 months of difference. Now, I want to be clear. Your red blood cells completely turn over in that window. So usually within 3 to 4 months, in our case, maybe we can say it's between, 2 to 5 months. Let's just be generous and say there's a 5-month window where they're absolutely all turned over, regardless of who you are. And oh, by the way, if the red blood cells were healthy to start and then you started carnivore, it's not like they'd be so healthy already that they'd live that much longer. But anyway, I digress again, because this is just such and I can't take it. So in 5 months, they completely turn over. So the only way what you're saying would be correct is if somehow they started carnivore 3 to 5 months ago and then by the end decided they were going to quit carnivore. Because if they've been on carnivore longer than 5 months, their HbA1c would have dropped because it'd be completely turned over. And oh, by the way, it's not like all your red blood cells go for a 5-month period and then they all get recycled at the same time. They're consistently being turned over time. The entirety of your bloodstream of red blood cells will be turned over in this time frame, but they are always turning over throughout that period of time. So again, Carnivore Cam, these other people, they have been carnivores for years. So looking at their blood work now and being like, well, the red blood cells actually last longer, it doesn't matter, you broccoli-headed moron. They've been carnivore for years. Therefore, and ergo, if their HbA1c is high, it's because it's high. Probably higher than you were when you tried.
Carnivore Cam is a fucking gay-ass retarded beta male, dude. I don't know why anybody listens to these faggots. The guy literally looks like, how do I would describe, like, he looks like if a child were trying to, like, get beer by dressing up as an adult. Why is anybody listening to this weak, skinny faggot with the fucking gay-ass broccoli hair? I don't get it.
Pre-diabetic. Of course not. His fasting glucose is normal, so he doesn't.
Wait. Hold on a second. I thought we just said at the beginning of the video, fasting blood glucose isn't that great of a marker. It's HbA1c. But then when the HbA1c is high, he says, well, his fasting blood glucose is good. So which is it?
Not have prolonged elevated blood sugar levels. For people to claim that a diet that contains close to 0 carbohydrate could possibly cause diabetes is absolutely ridiculous. In fact, the opposite.
He literally doesn't understand what diabetes is and how it's actually caused.
It happens. Most people who go on carnivore actually reverse their type 2 diabetes. There is not a...
Based on what evidence? Oh, your carnivore Facebook group? Okay. Again, we've seen Sean Baker, blood glucose above 120. Just that alone can place you right there in type 2 diabetes. Now people can ask, well, how could this happen without blood glucose? If you eat high amounts of fat, especially saturated fat, and you're also eating high amounts of protein, what you can have is you ramp up gluconeogenesis. Saturated fat has also been shown to decrease insulin sensitivity and increase liver fat, and liver fat is very detrimental to metabolic health. And so I would never say like protein is bad for blood sugar regulation, but in this specific context where you're eating tons of red meat, very fatty, high saturated fat red meat, in some people, yes, it can cause elevated levels of blood sugar because you're ramping up gluconeogenesis, so you're ramping up your endogenous production of glucose, but you also, as you're ramping that up, producing more blood glucose, actually understand the research and understand.
Yeah, Carnivore Cam's a bitch, dude. Fucking can't stand that dude. Just looks like a bitch.
The Russian Ministry of Defense is admitting that they are broke. Just what does it take to get even Russian state media to roll over and admit the truth? I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. Let's talk about it. Now, here's the thing. This isn't actually that big a story to those of us in independent media, that the Russian war economy is running on fumes and has been for a while. But the change is not so much the story. The change is right here in the corner. Here, let me show you guys. You see that? TASS. This is the Russian state media. This is not even like RT or Sputnik that pretends to be independent but is actually funded by the Russian government. TASS is literally the mouthpiece of Russian government press. And so the fact that TASS is rolling out a story saying, listen, the defense ministry operates under severe financial constraints this year is insane. Now, that doesn't mean that this is even remotely truthful. But before we talk about all the ways in which this is a almost comical lie.
Dude, I am so glad I got my own home gym in my attic. I can train whenever I want. Gym staff were so cancer they literally harassed me constantly trying to get me to do exercises I didn't want. Fuck these asshole. I was doing skull crushers. They said it's wrong.
Why the fuck were they even bothering you? Yeah, that's gay. Yeah, home gym's where it's at, dude. Fuck going to the gym. Dealing with bullshit. Home gym is superior. Thanks for the donation, though, Katakuri.
I wanted to mention...
Who's more retarded, Clavicular or Tefano? Well, obviously Tefano.
that it's the holidays. And if you're like me, you need caffeine to make it through, guys. I got 2 young kids, right? I'm still trying to stay in shape. I'm trying to Okay, so doesn't mean... So listen to this. Direct quotes from the Russian defense minister, Andrei Belousov, right, who, worth noting, is actually an economist who got put in charge of this war. And actually tell you everything about how desperate Russia is to win its war of attrition. Right, he says, quote, "This year, the defense ministry operated under severe financial constraints related to the federal budget's capacity, i.e., we're broke, the Russian government's broke." He continues, "However, Russian military operations led to an increase in military spending. All of this required strict optimization and prioritization of the military budget and a restructuring of the internal mechanisms for planning and execution." He noted, quote, "Austerity measures were applied to expenses not directly related to military operations, i.e., we cut everything we possibly could and trying to increase the..."
Podcast Ments.
Let me see.
What would you do if your arm got chopped off?
I would urinate on it, definitely not panic, and definitely not go to a hospital. And then I would just rub butter and honey on it and raw meat every single day. And eventually it would heal and maybe grow back. If you ever get in a bad accident or have huge cuts or even bone showing, you should never put alcohol in it. That's a complete myth. You should put butter, honey, raw meat. You'll wake up the next morning, it'll all be absorbed. You'll be like, where did the raw meat go? It just absorbs into the skin, and eventually that proteins and fats will help rebuild the skin, and you shouldn't even have a scar after a few years. But
wow, so no stitches.
Yeah, I have a friend that got in a huge motorcycle accident. He's on the diet. They tried to take him to the hospital. He said, "F you," and he literally had maggots living in his wound. He's rubbing butter. He was in Costa Rica. Butter, honey, raw meat every day for about 3 weeks. The 3rd week, I mean, there's pictures of it. He literally looked like completely healed. He had a little bit of pigmentation in the skin, but nothing. And it's because he didn't put alcohol in it and keep all the bacteria, which is there to help and heal you and fix your skin.
What would you do if your arm got chopped off?
I would urinate.
And some of the girls that I was dating was much older than me, like much older than me. I remember at one point I dated this girl named Natalia. She was like 34. I was like 14. And she had 4 kids that I didn't even know about. She was like a famous singer from France. And I was like, I didn't know she had kids. Which was crazy to me. And I found that out later.
I don't know what the fuck this guy is like baffling. So he's bragging about having sex with a single mom when he was 14. Like, what the fuck? So weird. Like, isn't the thing to do to like brag about how you're fucking 18-year-olds when you're like 35? It's just so weird. Well, thanks for the donation, nigga.
Actual amount spent on the war. He said some expenditures were deferred to later dates, others were reduced. This made it possible to reduce the overall value of expenditures, he claims, as a share of GDP from 2.7 to 2.2 in 2025. This is actually just a brazen lie, right? This just straight up is not correct. According to Deputy Minister, this allowed for the relocation of 800 billion rubles for the procurement of priority weapons, special purpose equipment, military equipment, optimizing state defense procurement assignments for military and special purpose equipment and weapons, as well as optimizing expenses. What is he talking about? Well, as best I can tell, this is blatantly a lie, by the way. This is military expenditure as a percentage of GDP. And for the record, this is the only military budget expenditures that you and I should care about, because this represents, in any given society, how much of that society's goods and services that are produced go towards protecting that society. This is pretty simple, right? So if you are a wealthy country, you are going to spend more on defense. Just like if you live in a sprawling Elon Musk style mansion, right? You are going to have more security than if you live on, for example, a trailer park, right? So an Elon Musk mansion might have a full-time security staff, multiple cameras, possibly some kind of acoustic detection, locks on windows and doors. You're going to spend a larger percentage of the home's value on protecting that home, right? That's just common sense. And so for Russia, for example, they reportedly spend historically have spent around 3% of their GDP on defense, on the Russian military. You can see in 2016, leading into the Russian annexation of Crimea, that spiked to 5% and then went back down as kind of they basically settled into fighting the Donbass. But then you can see when the war launched, they went from 3.6% to 4.6% the next year to 5.4% to 7.1% in 2024. And now that number likely even higher. Of course, we won't find out until after the end of the year. But you should understand that for the Russian economy, for the Russian state, more and more money is being spent on facilitating this war, and there's less and less money to go around, right? One analyst suspected that Russia could run out of liquid reserves as soon as the fall. This is probably what you're seeing. And so Russia is forced to essentially it's run out of savings, which means that if you run out of savings, right, you have to rely on the paycheck that hits on the first of the month to get you through the rest of the month. That's how Russia now has to run its war. And so the oil revenue sales that they make that month are funding the war into the next month, right? They are a cash-based, cash-in, cash-out war, which is why they are subject to such incredible constraints, right? They are basically down to just 31 billion at the end of November. So probably in 2025, right, it's unclear where Russia's going to get that money from. They've spent down literally close to $100 billion. Its spend is $130 billion on defense this year. Right? The most critical shortage is in budget financing, which is hilarious, right? That's like saying the most critical shortage right now in our household is actually in checking account balances. That's where we are critically short, which is code for I'm broke, right? But it's really, when you say it like that, it really makes it sound very, very businesslike. It doesn't sound like a crisis. We have critical checking. You should try it. And like right now, our most pressing EU is actually.
Yeah, could we have Russia like lose already? It's kind of insane how it's been going on for this long.
Getting the opposite message. Brussels says, listen, we ask all countries in the EU to maintain a balanced budget to make sure that you aren't dragging the EU economy down. But now they're saying, listen, we are going to loosen the reins when it comes to protecting yourself. And this is probably because of the Baltic states saying, listen.
Also, call 911. Looks like those officers were poorly trained and never bothered to properly sight. And you are also responsible for where the bullet goes.
Yeah, those cops are absolutely fucking retarded. Hopefully, they get fired and they're thrown in jail, ideally. Because that's insane. Thanks for the donation, though, James.
We already spend a lot of our GDP on defense, in some cases 5 and 6%. And they say, we want to spend more. Poland in particular, right? And the Europeans have said, sure, right. You want to finance your own defense? Great. We are lifting restrictions on defense spending, following the same logic as removing borrowing limits during the COVID-19 pandemic, right? This is why, and this was, of course, at Munich Security Conference, a significant annual security conference for Europe. And Europe finally has a real reason to do so. They have to beat the Russian Federation. They have to beat them themselves. That is one of the largest problems that they face. So again, hopefully, you're starting to see a real rebalancing between the Russian Federation military and the militaries of the European countries. Because as much as I hate the lack of policy by the Trump administration, when the policy that makes the most sense is when they say, if they had policy, sometimes they allude to perhaps considering a policy of saying, listen, the Europeans have to be responsible for their own defense. We are allies and we will backstop you, but you have to carry the burden for your own defense, and that's
What's going on, everybody? Vince Goodrum here. It is Sunday evening. Reason for the video is, well, the Great One has to show you something. All right? I'll check this out here.
Giant from the movie 300.
Chill,
Now, as you could tell, Jack Doherty's crew, or in this case, the broccoli heads, the simps, decided to try to jump this guy, Andrei Arlovsky, one of the most winningest people in UFC. Now, Jack has a habit of doing these bump into celebrity type things for social media, except this went terribly wrong. Very wrong.
Yo, Dave! Dave, help him, Dave! Go, get the fuck out! Get the fuck out! Get out!
Why are these broccoli-haired twinks thinking about fighting Andrei Arlovsky?
And of course, Jack is always hiding behind his black bodyguard there.
Yeah.
You know, one of these days, I'm expecting him to say, "Snooky, do work." I mean, that's got to be the most busiest bodyguard out there. I would hate to be Jack Doherty's bodyguard.
Go, Chewie, let's go! Dude, why that guy shot chicken? I don't know. Yo, how are you 260 and we still eat your hits? You're a little big.
Now, folks, a little bit of advice. Stop messing with my generation, okay? Gen Xers, we don't put up with this type of stuff here, okay? We don't do this, you know, we do social media, but we don't do this type of bumping into someone for views and then trying to purposely start a fight. You start a fight with someone like us, yeah, we're gonna frick your frack, basically. And the fact that you would actually do this to someone like Andrei Arlovsky, are you people out of your mind? Are you crazy? And Andre obviously didn't start it. It was intentionally done because the minute that Andre bumped into Jack, literally less than 2 seconds later, his broccoli-headed crew started trying to jump him. I mean, that in itself is crazy. I mean, you could have got sent to the hospital, you know? You're lucky all you got was your shirt torn off and your pride hurt, you know? But in any event, folks, there's many ways to get to a million subscribers, and this is just not one of them. And that's all I got to say for today. Be sure to like and subscribe.
Spaghetti. 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 Oh, shit. Oh, great. Here we go. Here we go. Yeah, there's the cat.
I want to ask you a question, and I want you to take a beat and reflect before you answer it.
I think I have DeWalt hand tools. I don't have any power tools.
When the administration of Donald Trump and Trump himself say, we brought in 10 trillion, 15 trillion, 18 trillion dollars from overseas or from tariffs, when he says either of those, do you believe Trump genuinely believes that, as ridiculous as it is? Or do you think Trump knows he's lying and the people in his administration know it?
Oh, he knows he's lying. He's been doing this his entire fucking career.
It's a lie, but they say it because they think their followers will believe it. Okay, I want to talk about that lie. Donald Trump has variably claimed that he brought in trillions of dollars from his overseas trips and getting gifts from his Middle East buddies, and that he has brought in $18 trillion from his tariffs in the last 10 and a half months. Not over a period of decades, but just the tariffs have brought in $18 trillion. Not billions, but $1 trillion, 18 of them. Now, I want to put aside for a moment that the tariffs aren't really money that is being brought in, because it's money that is American money paid by American companies to the American government. You import steel from China, well, you pay China for the steel, and then you pay the US government for the tariff on that steel. The American company pays the American government. Put that aside for a second. Let's just talk about the scale. And this might be useful also because it's good to conceptualize the size of the American economy. The American economy is about $27 trillion. If it were true that Donald Trump's tariffs have brought in $18 trillion, he could pay down a massive chunk of the national debt tomorrow. And in fact, it would be a heroic thing. Remember that before Donald Trump's first term, he told us he's going to pay off the national debt within one term. In fact, he blew up the deficit and grew the debt faster, much faster, than President Obama had. So either Donald Trump really has brought in $18 trillion and he's about to solve America's debt crisis, or this is nonsense and there is no one around Trump willing to challenge him on it, or Trump knows he's lying and he's lying because he thinks the people he's lying to are going to fall for it. Now let's again look at the math. The federal government doesn't even collect $18 trillion from all taxes combined, okay? Tariffs have, quote, brought in, and again, the money was already here. It's paid by American companies. Tariffs have represented $236 billion this calendar year based on Treasury data. Not 18 trillion, not 8 trillion, not 1 trillion, $236 billion. Over a decade, that would be expected to raise about $2.3 trillion for the federal government. But remember, paid by American companies. It's no...
Yeah, Trump's bad. Bad at everything. He's no good.
We're close to $18 trillion. To raise $18 trillion in a single year through tariffs, imports would all need to be taxed around 600%. Now, if you did that, it would be economic.
Wow, that's a lot. Yeah, so his numbers are just insane and retarded.
Disaster. Imports would collapse. Trade would stop. Tariff revenue would basically go to zero because there would be no trade to put tariffs on. So the claim isn't just wrong, it is a mathematically and politically impossible claim. This gets us to the question I started with. Does Trump know this is a lie, or does he actually believe it? Or is this something darker, which is a test of loyalty? These are common in cults, and these are common in authoritarian regimes. Everyone is expected to nod along to something they know isn't true. We talked about this in the aftermath of the 2020 election. We talked about it in the context of, do Republican voters really believe that the election was stolen by Joe Biden and that Trump was the rightful winner? Or are they saying it to signal that they are part of the in-group, part of the cult? Really common in cults and authoritarian regimes. Leader says something absurd, you show loyalty by...
Spaghetti. I mean, if you question Trump or say he's wrong in any way, he'll see that as a lack of loyalty. But Trump just lies because he thinks Makes him look good. He's been doing that in his entire career. You can look at how he got funding for that casino that he ended up going bankrupt on. He lied about how much money he had, how much revenue the casino was making, so that he could get investment money. So he's done this his entire career. Whoa, 50 minutes. Okay, there's no way we're watching a 50-minute video about bike sharing.
Thank you for coming. It's a treat to be with you and sharing all this stuff. Since we seem to be in a second Cold War, maybe it's a good time to revisit the last one to see why it turned out the way it did and why the participants in it thought it turned out the way it did. So I'm going to pose the question, why Russia lost the Cold War, and people have loads of different answers to that question. So this is going to be a tour of the counterarguments. I'm going to start with an answer that many Americans have, very simple one that's like, Ronald Reagan single-handedly defeated the Soviet Union. So that's one possible answer. But then I'm going to give you all kinds of counterarguments to that. And some of them are going to be other external explanations of what others did to the Soviet Union. Others are internal ones of what the Soviet Union, the cards that didn't play particularly well. And then I've got some umbrella explanations. So that's my plan for this evening. The story that Ronald Reagan did it, well, here's a picture at the Reagan Ranch after the Cold War is over. You see the Gorbachevs and you see the Reagans, and they seem to be having a grand old time, which suggests there's something maybe off with that explanation. But anyway, the way the Ronald Reagan did at school is Ronald Reagan did a massive military buildup, and that's, some would argue, it bankrupted the Soviet Union. He was a man of words and deeds. He made really good speeches that were memorable. Here's one before Parliament where he says, the regimes planted by totalitarianism have had more than 30 years to establish their legitimacy, but none, not one regime, has yet been able to risk free elections. Regimes planted by bayonets do not take root. And then here he is before the Brandenburg Gate. This is in Berlin, long a symbol of German greatness, but then it was a locked gate on the Berlin Wall. And here's Ronald Reagan, General Secretary Gorbachev, if you seek peace, if you seek prosperity for the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe, if you seek liberalization, come to this gate. Mr. Gorbachev, open this gate, tear down this wall. And who can forget the evil empire speech, which he gave to the National Association of Evangelicals in Orlando, Florida, and they skipped Disneyland to hear it. All right, Reagan did a very significant military buildup that actually had started under Carter when the Soviets invaded Afghanistan. Big mistake, as we discovered. And he also deployed missiles.
Yeah, most billionaires have gotten rich just being dickheads. You know, just jackasses in general.
In Europe, he was busy funding anti-communist insurgencies, and also others who didn't like the Soviet Union all over the world, starts doing more aggressive military patrolling, and by the time he's out of office, he's like half a dozen ships short of this 600-ship Navy or whatever it is he was planning to make. And he also was trying to build a missile shield, his strategic defense initiative. And the problem is the Soviets tried to match him on this. And if you add up the GNPs of the United States, NATO allies, and Japan, well, that would be 7 times larger than the Soviet GNP. And you got to be aware of symmetric strategy. So the CIA thought during the Cold War that perhaps Russia was spending up to a 20% part of its GNP on defense. After the Cold War ended, when you're getting more accurate statistics, it turns out it was at least 40 or 50%. And some people say it was up to a truly economy-busting 70% if you take into account all the infrastructure investments that were associated with military things. If you look during the Cold War, the United States was spending less than 8%, Germany less than 6%, Japan less than 2%, and Nazi Germany, which is no piker, 55%. So you look at all this, and it was difficult. So I am going to be quoting lots of Russians today because they have thought deeply about the fate of their country, how life as they knew it disappeared, the Soviet Union gone, the empire gone. They thought a lot about it. And here is a former Soviet ambassador to West Germany, Valentin Filin, and here's his take. Following the American strategy of our exhaustion in the arms race, our crisis in public health and all the things that have to do with standard of living reached a new dimension of crisis. And then if you add to the arms race of the United States, the arms race that was going on with China on that border, the arms race plunged the Soviet economy into a permanent crisis. And here you have Georgy Arbatov, who is the late Soviet Union's finest expert on the United States, or at least his most famous one. He's looking at the Soviet war in Afghanistan. He said, it is quite clear that the Afghan war was most advantageous for the United States. And we got our Vietnam because the United States is busy funding the other side. And it's costly. And Gorbachev is looking at this as he's telling the Politburo a year after he came into power. He said, look, the Americans are betting precisely on the fact that the Soviet Union is scared of this SDI missile, the Strategic Defense Initiatives, missile defense. That's why they're putting pressure on us to exhaust us. Correct. So some would argue that the U.S. victory in the arms race guaranteed victory in the Cold War. It'd be go Ronnie. That's one explanation. But I'm going to give you a tour of the counter-arguments and some other explanations, starting with Presidents Ford, Carter, and the Helsinki Declaration. So after World War II, the Soviets had wanted to convene a conference of European states to confirm its expanded World War II borders. And for a long time, nobody was interested. And then the Western Europeans are sick of all the drama. The United States still doesn't want to show, but we go along with our allies. And our allies insist on including human rights provisions. And we think this is crazy land because we know the Soviets are never going to enforce those things. But you get the Helsinki agreement, accords that have all sorts of human rights provisions. Well, lo and behold, unbeknownst to anybody, dissidents across the Eastern Bloc and human rights activists across the West start holding the communists to account for the agreements that they have signed and start contrasting the liberation that communism promises versus the dictatorship actually delivered. And this human rights movement took on within the Soviet bloc and abroad.
Yeah, I do my own maintenance on my motorcycles.
Took on a life of its own. So here you have the former director of the CIA and former head of the Department of Defense, Robert Gates, saying the Soviets desperately wanted this big conference, and it laid the foundations for the end of their empire. We resisted it for years, only to discover years later that this conference had yielded benefits beyond our wildest imagination. Go figure. And here is Jimmy Carter with his human rights initiative, and it was Gorbachev's English language translator who said that actually Carter's emphasis on precisely the human rights that were denied to Soviets really resonated, and it made people think that they wanted a more democratic, open, liberal society. So here's Carter giving an address, a graduation address at Notre Dame. He said, "We have reaffirmed America's commitment to human rights as a fundamental tenet of our foreign policy. What draws us Americans together is a belief in human freedom. We want the world to know that our nation stands for more than just financial prosperity. We're bigger than that." And here is Edward Shevardnadze, Gorbachev's foreign minister, echoing some of these sentiments. He said, look, the belief that we are a great country is deeply ingrained in me, but great in what? Territory? Population, quantity of arms, people's troubles, the individual's lack of rights? And what do we, who have virtually the highest infant mortality rate in the world, take pride? It's not easy answering the question. Who are you? Who do you wish to be? A country which is feared or a country which is respected? A country of power or a country of kindness? And others agreed that communism was essential to the survival of the Soviet Union, but it's an undemocratic ideology that fundamentally it's a foundation that can't endure forever. And that's the take of Vitaly Ignatyenko, who's a Russian journalist. And Oleg Grinevsky, who's a Soviet career diplomat, is saying, look, communist ideology is associated above all with the Soviet Union. Its rejection created a vacuum, and it determined its ultimate fate. And then Boris Yeltsin, who is Gorbachev's successor, said, look, no one wants a new Soviet Union. So some would argue, this counter-argument, that human rights clauses of the Helsinki Accords and Carter's subsequent human rights campaign destroyed communist belief in communism. Okay, another president, another counter-argument. Those who are fans of Richard Nixon would say, no. It was Richard Nixon who played the China card, so the United States and China could gang up on the Soviet Union and overextend it financially to wreck it militarily. I think the Chinese would beg to differ and say, no. It was Mao who played the America card. Because what's going on in 1969, there's a border war between China and the Soviet Union. China's gotten its nuclear bomb in 1964. It no longer has to defer to the Soviet Union and starts playing more tough on their border disagreements. And so the Soviets are really upset. And they come to the United States and ask us whether it would be okay to nuke these people. Because they think Americans don't like the Chinese. Well, we didn't, but we said, no, it's not okay to nuke those people. And so the Chinese figure it out. The one that wants to nuke you is your primary adversary, right? Up until then, you think about it, China and Russia, for them, the United States was the primary adversary. Now they're primary adversaries with each other, freeing up the United States to decide which one it's going to cozy up to. And the United States decides it's going to cozy up to China. Why? Well, Chinese belligerency forces the Soviets, not only, they've already got a big militarized border with Europe, now they're going to do the same thing on a very long border with China. And this is nuclear armed, mechanized forces, very expensive. Imagine if this country had to have such borders with Canada and Mexico. It would be bankrupting. And we are far richer than the Soviet Union was then, whenever. It was bankrupting. So some would argue that U.S. cooperation with China fatally overextended the Soviet Union. One could take all of these arguments, starting with President Nixon all the way through Reagan, to say, make an overarching argument that says, look, each president opened up opportunities for the others who then leveraged them. So Nixon plays the China card, which others play with increasing dexterity. Ford comes in and begins dabbling in human rights. Carter then comes in and really goes for human rights and starts doing a military buildup, which then Ronald Reagan really does. So that by the time you get to Reagan, he is dealing in a position of both ideological and military strength vis-a-vis the Soviet Union. And for those who think that U.S. foreign policy was not consistent during the Cold War, you're not looking at it at the strategic level. There were certain different strategies going on and how best to achieve it. But both parties agreed the goals were free trade, democracy, containment of communism. Those were staples of U.S. foreign policy, both parties for its duration. So some would argue that Presidents Nixon through Reagan produced the cumulative presidential effects to defeat the Soviet Union. Okay, others would say, forget this great man theory of history business, that's really passe. What really accounted for the outcome of the Cold War was this military platform, that's Pentagonese for large military systems. But anyway, it's a nuclear-powered, nuclear-armed submarine. They say that this is the item. The way deterrence theory worked during the Cold War, and I believe now as well, is in order to deter the other side, you have to have a reliable second strike capability. So if they thought of lobbing a nuke at you, they would be guaranteed that you would have the second strike to lob a nuke back. Therefore, they're never going to lob the first nuke. When Jimmy Carter became president, he was a graduate of Annapolis and also a submariner. The United States began a much more aggressive deployment of its fleet, and that's continued even more so under Reagan, where we're taking our submarines and we're targeting Soviet submarines
Jimmy
in their
Carter's
home water bastions. So the Soviets are thinking that we're going to...
Jimmy Carter's a bitch. Jimmy Carter is a complete and utter bitch. Stupid bitch, Jimmy Carter. Ugh. Spaghetti. Oh God. This cat's coming after me. Duckov. The fuck? Don't know if I'd like that game or not. Looks kind of cool, but I don't know if it really plays well. You beat Baby Steps twice. Yeah, you really like that game. This cat is being rather annoying. You may stop irritating me. You're very welcome to stop being annoying. Anytime you want, you could stop irritating me. Yeah, anytime you can just stop being annoying. Anytime you want. That's right. You can stop being irritating. It's a good cat. Why are you being so weird? How about you get your cat butt off? Yeah, I should play Ready or Not. And that other game, Body Cam.
And be able to destroy their second strike capability on our first strike, and they're having a heart attack. So here you have Valery Bolden, a longtime aide to Gorbachev, saying, look, the most powerful strength of the United States is the naval fleet, and we aren't going to get one, or our geography actually isn't set up to use one the way the United States can. And then you have Marshal Yazov saying, for the Americans, the main means of atomic attack is the fleet. So when you get Marshal Akhrameyev, who's visiting the United States in 1987, at the end of the Cold War, he will kill himself, but he's still around in 87, and he's telling his American hosts, you know where our submarines are, but we don't know where yours are. It's destabilizing. You, the United States Navy, are the problem. Go Navy. And here's his host, Admiral Trost, who's going, yeah, the inability of the Soviet Union to maintain a strong defensive capability led to the demise of the Soviet Union and to the removal of the Soviets as a major threat to us. So you can make a perfectly good argument to say the Soviet Union could not counter technologically or financially.
I'm just gonna put my food that I can't eat right now in the fridge so this cat stops harassing me and being irritating. Is the Steam console real? It is real. They are going to... really? Yeah, release it next year or whatever. Aaron P. You jackass. Man. I'd like a nice big tall iced tea. Iced tea would be nice. Fuck. You know what I'm saying? I like iced tea. Alright, I'll be right back. Okay, get the fuck out. Get the fuck out. I even fed him extra food today. And then he just like anytime, every time I do that, he just acts exceptionally greedy.
Actually, the U.S. submarine threat to its retaliatory nuclear forces, so war termination was the only thing it could do. All right. So all of these preceding explanations are naval explanations, spelled with an E, as in staring at one's own. They're all about what the United States did or didn't do. So let's get beyond the half-court tennis of Team America, and you need to look at the other side of the net. And this is where the Western guru for things military, Karl von Clausewitz, emphasizes reciprocity in war and the interaction of both sides. That you're not going to do well unless you consider what the other side is doing. So I have given you some external explanations, and I'm going to do the internal ones. And here is Arnold Toynbee. He's one of the finest historians of the 20th century. He wrote a big, multi-volume history of the West, and which he argues that civilizations die from suicide, not by murder. So I discussed the murder, what the United States tried to do to the Soviet Union. Now I'm going to talk about the suicide, what the Soviets did to themselves. And here is counter-argument number one, which the argument is the Soviet Union was an empire, and when that collapsed, that meant they lost the Cold War. During the Cold War, the Korean War, and the Vietnam War, there was much fear in the West of this domino theory, and the idea is one country fell to communism, and then the next would fall to communism. Turns out the domino theory did not apply to capitalism. It applied to communism, because once the democratic contagion hit one Warsaw Bloc country in Eastern Europe, it spread to the others until it was a seething mess, and they fell like dominoes. So in 1988-89, there were all kinds of demonstrations in the Eastern Bloc, the Soviet Union. In the Soviet Union, they're for political freedoms. In the Eastern Bloc, they're for freedom from the Soviet Union. And Gorbachev may have not gotten that detail. But they're all about not only wanting political freedoms, but also they're about crumbling economies, of how to fix their miserable standards of living. And very uncharacteristically, the Russians didn't send tanks. In fact, Gorbachev welcomed and encouraged reforms in the Eastern Bloc, both political and economic, just as he was doing in the Soviet Union. So his ideas of glasnost, openness, and perestroika, rebuilding, they resonated at home and abroad. And these reforms began in Poland. Poland had been a scene of much worker unrest many times in 1956, 1970, 1976, and 80 and 81. In 80 and 81, this is when Solidarity, the workers' movement, gets going, and it gets a national and international reputation. The next set of strikes are happening in 1988, because in the preceding several years, the Polish standard of living had shrunk by over 3%, and the government was out of cash and wanted to raise basic food prices, and Poles hit the streets. And the government was in a panic because it was worried the economy would go into free fall. So the government cut a deal with Solidarity, said, you call off the strikes, and then we'll let you into political talks. And Solidarity agreed. And there was a complicating factor on that.
Try that shit with me and your body has just become a target-rich environment.
I don't know what you're talking about, but thanks for the donation, James.
This is called the Roman Catholic Church, which is an institution of enormous credibility and legitimacy in Poland, which had a partiality for Solidarity, and it had a Polish pope. So the roundtable discussions were these political talks. They occurred a year later in February 1989, and the Soviets encouraged them. In fact, here's one Soviet person there advising the Poles, look, you got to find some quick solutions out of your economic and political mess. You're an itty-bitty country, so when you make mistakes, they'll be itty-bitty mistakes, but if we make them, they'll be big. They got that one right. The Polish Communist Party thought they had this one covered by the way they jiggered the election rules. Not quite. The day they held elections is exactly the same day that Deng Xiaoping turned the tanks on demonstrators in Beijing, and you have the Tiananmen massacre. Two solutions for the problem. So the way the elections worked out in Poland is Solidarity won every single seat for which it could compete but won. And then only 3 people in the communist designated seats actually won. So who won all the rest of them? The box on the ballot called none of the above. Yes, the Roman Catholic Church had helped instruct people that that's the box you want. And with that, the legitimacy of the Communist Party to rule had just been wrecked, and we're on to democracy in Poland. And this democratic contagion spread into East Germany 4 months later. This is about the 40th anniversary of the founding of East Germany, and 70,000 people demonstrated at Leipzig, and within the week around, like 1.4 million Germans are demonstrating, and over 200 demonstrators. Typically, the East Germans would have sent tanks. That was what they would have done in the past, but would-be tank man Erich Honecker was already out of a job. His ruinous policies of living off debt since he came to power in 1971 had just about wrecked East Germany, so he was out. And then less than 2 weeks later, the Council of Ministers resigns, and then on November 8th, the Politburo resigns, and then on the 9th, whatever's left of that government is issuing new travel regulations, and you might wonder what travel got to do with it. I'll get there. So in response to a question at a news conference, this guy, Gunter Schabowski, who was one of the remaining communists helping run the show, he gets asked a question, doesn't know the answer, and so he wings it. And the question is, when do these travel regulations go into effect? And he goes, immediately. Well, crowds immediately started gathering at the 6 gates to the Berlin Wall. And at one of them, the border guards decided that discretion was a better part of valor, and they opened the gate. And East Germans poured into West Berlin. And within the first week alone, over half of East Germany's population visited the West. And within the month, 1% of the population emigrated to the West. And like the Polish elections, this opening the gate was a pivotal decision. A pivotal decision, whatever it is, there's no going back to the way it was. And here's good old Gunter going, gosh, we hadn't a clue that opening the wall was the beginning of the end of East Germany. Okay, better luck next time. And the Russians were shocked by how unpopular they were. They were thinking they were going to get credit, Gorbachev, for East Europe's liberation rather than blame for Eastern Europe's encirclement. And here you have Yuri Ryzhov, a scientist and parliamentarian, going, all of our former satellites by compulsion cast off from us as fast and as far as possible. And Anatoly Kovalyov, who was a deputy foreign minister, said, look, and we had no confidence whatsoever concerning whom the East German army is going to shoot, the demonstrators or us. And the same thing for the Polish and Hungarian armies. Great. With allies like this, who needs enemies? The allies got to cover it. So under this argument, unrest in the empire forced the Soviet Union to forfeit the Cold War. Okay, I got another counter argument. That's nonsense. The real problem was the satellites were unhealthy. That's why the whole thing fell apart. So this map is 1960, and you see all those tempting green places? They're about to become independent, and they are really sick of their Western European colonizers. Entered the Soviet Union with a program to put the West out of business. There were many takers. Okay, fast forward to the late 1980s. Soviet Union is on a roll. Small hitch. In the late 1970s, there was a big recession, and it continued into the 80s, and it tanked commodity prices. So for some of the newfound pals like Angola, South Yemen, Ethiopia, Nicaragua, it wrecked their export earnings because they're exporting commodities. These commodity prices are down. In many cases, it halved them. The Soviet Union was really dependent on oil exports, still is. Oil prices tanked, and oil accounted for up to 55% of the Soviet budget. So here, Brezhnev has got a deep bench of non-performing pals at a time when he doesn't have the money to support all of them. And worse yet, from the Soviet point of view, so it's dumped all this money in these third world friends. Meanwhile, it's got its own nationalities who are deeply unhappy, and they want out of the empire. And most problematically, they all revolt at exactly the same time. And one of the rules for continental empire is no two-front wars. Well, Russia has so many fronts at this point, it can't even keep count. And the unrest in the internal empire of nationalities started as soon as Gorbachev got in. There were student movements in Kazakhstan and Yakutia, opposite ends of things. By the time you get to 1990, I don't know, there are like 76 seething ethnic rebellions in different parts of this. There was too much to go on for the Soviet government to handle. So you could argue that the Soviet Union bankrupted itself on the third world while ignoring its own internal third world of nationalities whose simultaneous revolts brought down the Soviet Union.
I experimented with different video models to help me animate some of my essays. But the thing is, my team and I are very opinionated about what we want the end product to look like. And so for a video model to be
if you look at
looking to give your models, there's a good chance that Labelbox can help you. Reach out at labelbox.com/thewarcash.
I got a completely different argument for you. If you don't like all of those, I got another one for you. It's the economy's stupid, right? That line. One could argue that communism failed as an economic system. If you look at growth statistics for the Soviet Union, they're pretty good post-World War II when they're rebuilding, but they really stagnate from the mid-70s onward. So for the decade preceding Gorbachev's coming to power, Soviet growth stats were 1% to 2% lower than those of the United States, and the compounding effects of that were enormous. What's going on? Everyone's lying to each other. So the data that Soviets are using is garbage. So if you're working for a subunit of an enterprise, you have to lie about the inventories you have, saying you have less than you do, and then you have to lie about what you need, saying you need more than you do, because you're worried about getting enough things. It's not a market system where the price dictates it. This is all about the plan. You got to enter the right numbers, and then you get whatever inputs you get from the centralized plan. So everyone's lying. They're aggregating all the lies. The higher up the food chain you aggregate these things, the worse the data is, so that the Soviet government has no idea what the actual value of capital or labor are, no idea what actual productivity is, and no one has any idea what consumer preferences are. You're not using markets and prices. So that the misallocation of capital and labor goes unnoticed until it metastasizes. It's already metastasized into a catastrophe. And to give you a sense of these misallocations, the Soviet Union was rotting from 20 to 40% of its crops. Well, it's using scarce hard currency for agricultural imports to make up for those crops. Total mess. And so you can look at what happens to the economy with oil prices down. We're into a spiraling mess. So that from when Gorbachev comes in 85 to when it hits a trough in Russia in 1998, you see this crashing share of world GDP of the Eastern Bloc. as a result of all this. If you look at Soviet statistics on deficits, trade balances, debt, they're just soaring, and then GDP growth goes double-digit negative. That's called shrinkage. It's not the normal thing. So Marshal Yazov, here's his take. We simply lack the power of all these wealthy NATO nations. We had to find an alternative to the arms race. So, and here's a Foreign Service officer, Anatoly Adamyshin. He said, look, our problems began with the departure from isolation. There are main...
Tutoring killers, man, what the fuck is this? Let me see.
Freedom is dying slowly in Canada, not with one fell swoop, but by the death of 1,000 cuts. In the United Kingdom, more than 30 citizens are arrested every day over their social media posts. This Orwellian nightmare that the once free people of the United Kingdom are experiencing came about slowly, step by step by step, as citizens did not see each small step as important enough to really raise an outcry and push back. Likewise, in Canada, too few Canadians have protested against or objected to a series of bills that have given the federal government gradual control over the internet and therefore control and censor our speech. The Justice Centre has released a report called Death by 1,000 Clicks, The Rise of Internet Censorship and Control in Canada. So briefly, first we had the Online Streaming Act, which gave more power to the Canadian Radio, Television and Telecommunications Commission, the CRTC. And so today in Canada, every podcast, every video, all the content produced by Canadians individually, businesses, charities, are now deemed to be broadcasting and under the authority of the CRTC. Next, also in 2023, we had the Online News.
Pretty sure that's inaccurate. But whatever.
Act, which resulted in Meta blocking all Canadian news on Facebook and Instagram and other social media. So Canadians have less access to news than previously, and the dependent media companies that it was supposed to help have actually seen a decline in readership and viewership. Next, we had the Online Harms Act. Now, fortunately,
yeah, this is just typical liberal policy. Like, why did we vote for liberals again? Why? Just retarded.
Died with the 2025 federal election. However, the government is committed to bringing back the same contents, including the creation of a digital safety commission, which would have sweeping powers over internet content, would be able to enforce regulations passed by the federal cabinet without any input from parliament, and would give this digital safety commission all kinds of powers to censor the speech of Canadians. Now, as if the vague definition of the emotion of hate in the criminal code is not already bad enough, the Online Harms Act would also empower the Canadian Human Rights Commission to prosecute Canadians over non-criminal discriminatory speech. And now before Parliament, we've got the Strong Borders Act, which I think should be called the Strong Surveillance Act, which gives broad powers to government officials for warrantless access to our computers and cell phones, new powers for government to order private companies to turn over their metadata and subscriber information. We've got before Parliament as well the Critical Cyber Systems Protection Act, which is Bill C8, which would actually empower the federal government to kick Canadians off the internet if the minister felt that there was a threat of interference, manipulation, disruption, or degradation. Not at all clear if somebody is spreading what the government deems to be misinformation, that they would not be deemed to be posing a threat to cybersecurity. So that's very dangerous. Last but not least, and the most urgent one to contact your member of Parliament about, is the Combating Hate Act, which is Bill C9, which is now before Parliament. It would vastly increase the number of Canadians getting prosecuted for hate speech offenses. It's a big step towards becoming more like the United Kingdom, where thousands of...
Yeah, we're becoming more like the UK. I don't know why the fuck people voted for the Liberals and Carney. I want to be more poor. I don't want any rights. I want more crime. Vote Liberal. Thanks for the donation, too.
Reasons for a collapse were internal, not external reasons. The Soviet economy was literally exhausted from this monstrous arms race, militarism, enemies with half the world. That's his take. And Gorbachev told the Central Committee, he said, look, we're encircled not by invincible armies, but by superior economies. And he often told people, living this way any longer is impossible. So you can make a powerful argument. It's the Soviet economy that lost the Cold War. This gentleman, Alexis de Tocqueville, is very famous for writing a book about the last days of the French monarchy before the French Revolution overturned it. He also wrote something about Democracy in America, both excellent books. But this one's come from the one about France, and which Tocqueville observes the most dangerous moment for a bad government is when it begins to reform. Russians of all political persuasions, they agree on at least one thing, and that is that Gorbachev's role and how the Cold War turned out was pivotal, that he played in a very essential part. And Gorbachev made his decisions based on certain false assumptions. One of them was the irreversible direction of history. Gorbachev thought of history going always forward towards communism, never backwards to capitalism. Of course, Eastern Europe took a U-turn. He went straight back to capitalism. And here's Layne who was a senior person in the KGB, their intelligence office, he said, the thought never occurred to the government that it's possible to withdraw from socialism. And if you think about both communist theory and how
Why would you spend $80,000 for an Ariel Atom when you could get a new Toyota Supra for that price? Well, for one thing, they're not the same price. If you, like, nobody gets a fucking base model car, dude. Like, that's just fucking stupid. Secondly, the Ariel Atom, has a fucking Honda engine in it, whereas the Supra isn't even a Toyota, it has a BMW engine in it. Totally different engines, one's reliable, one isn't, one costs $1 billion to work on, one doesn't. The power to weight ratio of those cars is also completely fucking different. The Ariel Atom would anally rape the Toyota Supra. If you want to have a Toyota Supra be remotely comparable to the Ariel Atom, you'd have to tune the fuck out of it. It's also, is the Supra rear-wheel drive or is it all-wheel drive? But the Atom's rear-wheel drive, you can turn TC completely off, doesn't have ABS, just fucking raw, there's no stupid computers and infotainment screens and bullshit, it's just a better car.
imperialism works in practice, usually the mother country is more developed than whatever all the colonies are, right? Well, the Soviet Union was an inverted empire. People in Eastern Europe as a group were more well educated and they were richer than Russians. It was like a donut empire. So that when the empire went to Eastern Europe, Russians could no longer siphon off the wealth of these serf populations in Eastern Europe, which explains why they wanted to leave. It also suggests why Putin wants them back. Another false assumption has to do with the sentiments of the neighbors. Gorbachev was convinced he was going to get credit for liberating Eastern Europe rather than blame as a Russian for having serfed them in the first place. For Gorbachev, the clock began on his watch. For other people, no, Stalin's when it began, when he started shooting a lot of people. So here you have Anatoly Chernayev, foreign policy advisor to Gorbachev, saying, that Gorbachev thought that bringing freedom to our Eastern European satellites would have them adopt socialism with a human face. He made an enormous mistake because these countries brutally turned their back on us. Really? If that's brutal, then what, pray tell, was Stalin? And then it gets better. The politics in connection with our former friends were totally unexpected to us. Really? You occupy people, you never leave, you shoot a lot of people in their government, you put in a new government, you siphon off a lot of their wealth, and you impose a non-performing economic system, and you wonder why they don't like you. Think about the United States. Intervenes all around the world in other people's troubles, dumps billions in economic aid, and even leaves, and people don't like us. I don't know why the Russians think they're so special. Another false assumption. Gorbachev believed that if the Warsaw Pact disappeared, the military alliance of the Eastern Bloc, if that disappeared, then NATO would disappear. And that if the Comecon, which is their trading organization, if that goes away, then it's a European community in those days. It becomes the European Union later. Anyway, that would disappear. Not quite, because it turns out that organizations that are coercive versus those that are voluntary, they dissolve for different reasons. And then Gorbachev also assumed that the United States would share a continental outlook of not wanting strong powers, and that the United States therefore would not want a unified Germany, let alone a strong unified Germany. So when all the unrest is happening in Germany, Gorbachev is off taking a vacation. Poor life choice, because at that moment, President George Bush Sr. and Chancellor Kohl of Germany are working on fast-tracking German unification of a fully sovereign, unified Germany, both halves in NATO. All right, so many of Gorbachev's closest supporters at the end of it all blamed him. They said, look, his foreign policy mistakes were a function of his domestic policy mistakes, and it destroyed the Soviet Union. And back to this America expert, Vladimir Lukin, Gorbachev was no Deng Xiaoping. Okay. And Arbatov, who's their premier America expert, the stupidity of our leaders caused the disintegration of the Soviet Union. So the big bozo was playing with plastic bags, stuck one on his head, committed suicide. It was by mistake. All right, Lukin continued, in the West, they loved Gorbachev because everything took place so easily and cheaply, basically like that, but only for you. For us, it was expensive. But you could argue the time to reassess all the Stalinist stuff was long overdue. All right, here's a completely different way of looking at it. I've been giving you sins of commission, and now I'm going to do sins of omission. It's a good framework. It's useful for other things. So the sins of commission are all the things Gorbachev did. Now what I'm going to do is what the army didn't do. Some would argue that the Red Army should have done exactly what Deng Xiaoping ordered his army to do. You just send tanks against civilian demonstrators, and they will truly crush them. And it'll be over. Communist Party is still in power in China 30 years later. So there are some people who believe that this was a terrible mistake. So this argument would be that timely tank deployments, TTD, my contribution to military acronyms, would have changed the outcome of the Cold War. All right. Others would be back to the great men of history and sins of commission, and they wouldn't be picking on Gorbachev, but his successor, Boris Yeltsin, who, and there are two big pieces of evidence. Look, he removed Article 6 from the Soviet Constitution, which basically guaranteed that the Communist Party would always be it would monopolize power. And then in addition, the following years, so Yeltsin's the head of Russia, he gets together with the heads of Ukraine and Belarus, and they signed the Belovezh Accords, which then formally dissolved the Soviet Union. So according to this way of thinking, it's his fault. It's suicide on purpose. And what it does is it opens the door for multiple parties and for the nationalities within the Soviet Empire to become independent. All right. So I've given you internal explanations. I've given you external explanations. Now I'm going to give you some umbrella explanations. And they're based on all the preceding evidence. And they come to opposite conclusions. The first one was, well, any of the above, it's inevitable. And the opposite conclusion from the same evidence is, no, it took all of the above. The West barely won. So I'm going to start with any of the above. You could argue with this many serious problems, it was a matter of time before the Soviet Union collapsed. And it was an objectionable system for precisely the reasons the West didn't like it. It had a brutally inefficient economic system. And Russians who invented the thing at the end of the day didn't want it either. So by this way of looking at it, you have people like Yuri Ryzhkov, a genuine rocket scientist, who says, look, the main reason for the collapse of the Soviet Union is the rottenness of its system. And then here's a journalist, Timura Stepanov, who said, look, I think from the beginning, the genes of disintegration were contained in the genetics of this governmental political formation. Don't you love the products of the Soviet educational system? Don't ever use wording like that. All right, so you could argue that the Soviet Union was destined to fail with this many problems. Others would come to the opposite conclusion. They would say, no, it took every single one of them for the Cold War to end on Western terms. And here's back to Anatoly Kovalyov, the deputy foreign minister. He said, look, all these factors merge. Internal, ideological, economic, military. It's all of them. You remove any one of them and you get a different outcome. Maybe the Cold War ends, but it might end completely differently. So by this line of reasoning, the best barely won. Should feel very fortunate that it did. One can take this last argument and say it was more than that. It also took the confluence in office of two very talented leaders, Helmut Kohl of Germany and George Bush Sr. of the United States. Not the son who got into those forever wars, but the dad who didn't. George Bush Sr. had one of the most amazing resumes of any president ever to any person to become president of the United States. Just look at him. When he's really young, he's a war hero in World War II. He's a Navy pilot. Dangerous thing to do. He did it. And then he comes back and he gets his BA at Yale and graduates with honors. And then he becomes a representative for this a district in Texas after he's already made himself a millionaire by the oil business that he started. And then he becomes ambassador to the UN, followed by U.S. representative to the PRC. It's before we had formal diplomatic relations, so he's the guy who's setting that off, becomes director of the CIA, and then he is Ronald Reagan's understudy for 8 years as vice president. He is incredibly fit for the job. And Helmut Kohl is equally fit for the job. He is the longest-serving chancellor in German history since his illustrious predecessor, Otto von Bismarck. He starts out getting a PhD in history and political science. He also starts out in business, but then he works for state government, initially as a representative, then as a governor, and his political party, the Christian Democratic Union, for a quarter of a century. Once he gets in, he decides he's going to buy up East Germany one tourist at a time. How does that work? East Germans turned out really like to travel. West Germans had always been able to travel to East Germany, or they long had been able to travel to East Germany, but East Germans definitely could not easily travel to West Germany. Why? Because they have a habit of staying. But all of a sudden, East Germany eases up on the travel regulations. And you might ask why? And the answer would be money. Just like the Poles, the East Germans were deep in an economic mess of their own making. Would-be tank man Erich Honecker, who got the boot at the very end, well, his staying in power paradigm that he implements in 1971 is going to be easily going to live off debt. He needs to make certain social benefits available and consumer benefits available for labor stability, not having labor unrest. And the way he's going to do that is he's not going to do many domestic investments, and he's going to do a lot of borrowing, particularly from West Germany. Well, that's unsustainable long term. So by the time you get to the end of the Cold War, if he's going to fix that and even out the accounts, it would be a 30% decline in East German standard of living. So he really needs the pocket change from the tourists. So what Kohl does is a brisk business of tourists and things. What he does, in return for the easing of travel restrictions, he pays East Germany several hundred million Deutschmarks extra to allow that to happen. And then he gets the Hungarians to go along. He gets the Hungarians to open up their Austrian border to let East Germans out that way, and he gives them a $500 million Deutschmarks for that little favor. And then when Kohl introduces his 10-point unification program, because now he's thinking he's going to get both Germanys together, this is when he starts doling out big bucks to the Soviet Union, whose economy is unraveling. And Gorbachev is going to be desperate for this cash as that's happening. So West Germany provides $100 million in food, especially in meat, for the Soviet Union that doesn't have these things. Nevertheless, the unrest just keeps on going. The Berlin Wall, as I've told you, is breached, and then you wind up with a West German caretaker government, and the financial situation in Russia itself is unraveling. And by the time you get to January 1990, Bush and Kohl get together, and they've decided they want to really fast-track German reunification. Why? Because they got to get it done before this unraveling crisis that Gorbachev falls from power as a result of it. So they have got a game going, the two of them. And it's complicated, and here's why. Gorbachev was dead against Germany, a united Germany in NATO. He's not keen about really a united Germany, let alone one in NATO. The U.S. State Department experts, the guys who know everything, are saying, no, you want to go slow on this unification business. And then Kohl is running a coalition government. There are people in that government he cannot fire because they're from different political parties. One of them is his foreign minister, this guy Genscher, who is very skeptical about Germany being part of NATO. And then it turns out, although Britain had talked a good piece during the Cold War, it didn't actually want a unified Germany, nor did France. Why? Because that unified Germany would eclipse theirs economically. They didn't want that to happen. So Kohl and Bush divide up the tasks. Kohl is going to reassure the Soviet Union that Germany's not going to be belligerent or do horrible things, and Kohl's going to work on the financial unification, because the Soviets are thinking in terms of military unification, where you deploy your troops, that determines things. Wrong instrument of national power. Precisely because the Soviets didn't understand finance, that's why they're in such a mess, whereas the Germans do. What they're going to do is get East Germany on the West German Deutschmark, and at that point, they will control all the money, and they will control decisions. So the Russians aren't going to see that coming. Meanwhile, Bush is supposed to work the alliances with particularly Britain and France in the West. There are all sorts of meetings that were coming up, and Bush's job is to delay those meetings for as long as possible so German unification can proceed as far as possible. And the two of them are doing a tag team diplomacy with Gorbachev that he just can't keep up with given that his own home economy is got this double-digit shrinkage rates. So here's how they go. As the trades get bigger, the amount of money you pay Gorbachev gets bigger. So first of all, it's just to get a unified Germany. Then it's to get a unified Germany with West Germany still in NATO. Then it's to get unified Germany with all of Germany in NATO. So here's how the money goes. Gorbachev agrees to German unification. We are no longer paying hundreds of millions of Deutschmark. We're paying billions of Deutschmark, 5 billion Deutschmark for that one. Then Gorbachev agrees that states can choose their own alliances, i.e. whether or not to join NATO. And then the U.S. offers 9 assurance, but it's also a trade agreement that Gorbachev really wants. And then the economic union goes into effect. So we've now done the financial reunification of Germany. And this is when there's a London declaration that's inviting Eastern European countries to coordinate more closely with NATO. And then in return, Gorbachev has got a promise of a G7 summit meeting that's going to fast track aid to him, which it will do. And then Gorbachev agrees to German NATO membership. And at this point, even bigger things are happening. Germany's going to agree to its border with Poland. I'll get there and explain. And Germany provides 15 billion in Deutschmark, including building all kinds of new apartment buildings for repatriated Soviet soldiers who are going home. Why are you doing that? Because you want those soldiers focused on buying furniture, not running a military coup. That's what they're doing. So the unification happens in mid-September 1990. And here's the Polish borders. At the end of World War II, Stalin moved Poland 200 kilometers to the west, and it winds up taking a third of German territory by the time that's all over. And so the Germans don't really want to sign all that away. And in addition, as part of that, there were 12 million German refugees who were thrown out of where they were living to send them back to Germany, of whom 2 million died. So this is a big deal, and it's in living memory. Germany agrees to this, that the borders are done, German-Polish borders are set. Complicating factor, a month and a half before this unification treaty is signed, Saddam Hussein decides he's going to invade Kuwait because he's broke, because he's had a long war with Iran, huge debts, many owed to Kuwait, which he doesn't want to pay back. So if you invade them, that solves that problem. And also, he would take over Kuwait's very rich oil fields, and together that would make Iraq probably the swing producer of oil. So he thinks that's a great idea, except the Cold War's over, actually, and the Russians are more than willing to cooperate with the United States. Gorbachev really needs more money, and he is willing to go along with Iraq out of Kuwait, but not with regime change in Iraq. Because think about it, Iraq is a very important creditor state to the Soviet Union. It owed them between $10 and $13 billion. That's a lot of money for a broke creditor, but Gorbachev is being extraordinarily cooperative with Bush Sr. He sends Evgeny Primakov on multiple missions to Baghdad. The first one, Primakov gets all Russian hostages out of Iraq, and then on the second trip, he gets all Westerners out, Americans included. Third trip, not so lucky. He's there for the coalition force bombing. I don't think he liked that very much. But imagine that bombing going on if there were Western human shields going down with every target. Russia took that card right off the table. And here's some of the reasoning. Sergei Tarasenko was an aide to Foreign Minister Shevardnadze, and they understood that the United States was going to do something about this invasion of Kuwait. And so the Russians thought it'll be better if we force all of this to go through the UN, where Russia has a veto power. And he said, look, there was a division of roles. It extends to China, the help that Russia provided. When the Americans asked us to work with the Chinese, we told the Chinese, think about it. You're one of the big five with veto player. Doesn't it suit your interest to funnel everything through the UN where you can put your foot down? And the Chinese came around to that idea. However, the Russians had red lines. And here's Anatoly Kovalyov again, the deputy foreign ministry. The red line is American troops stay out of Iraq. No regime change in Iraq. You do that and you will tank termination of the Cold War, and that would be the goal. The goal. Here's Kovalyov saying, "I advance the basic principle that we must support the territorial integrity of Iraq. This was our sacred position, but we must not permit a division of Iraq." So if you wonder why the ground war ended after 100 hours, this is it. That the big thing out there is war termination of the Cold War. That's the big thing. Saddam Hussein is a minor event over there. Sorry, but he was. Anyway, and if it had tanked Cold War termination or upset the reunification of Germany, France and Britain might have been very happy, because François Mitterrand, who was the president of France, and Margaret Thatcher, prime minister of Britain, were against German unification. They knew it would marginalize their own country. Germany's going to be a bigger economy, which it is. François Mitterrand eventually found solace in expanding the European Union, European community to the European Union, when you're incorporating all these Eastern Bloc countries into it. And he plays a really important role in concluding the Maastricht Treaty that forms the European Union. But Margaret Thatcher just plain lost. She was just upset about the whole thing. She said, Germany will be the Japan of Europe, and worse than Japan. I guess she hadn't been to Japan lately. She said, the Germans will get in peace what Hitler couldn't get in war. And she wanted to leave Red Army troops in Germany for the duration. Imagine if that had been the case, and now dealing with Putin. If he had troops in Germany, we would be in trouble. But Bush and Kohl worked around all of them. And Bush said to Kohl at the end of it, he said, look, I'm not going to beat my chest and dance on the Berlin Wall. Both of them were very careful never to humiliate Gorbachev about the Soviet loss of the Cold War. Why? Because they knew that if they did that, he might fall from power sooner rather than later. Also, they were afraid that if they did that, the hardliners would come to power much more rapidly than they actually did. It was 20 years before Putin started consolidating his power. And the newly independent countries of Eastern Europe needed those 20 years to integrate militarily, politically, economically with the West, so that the cement could set before you got the Russians trying to destabilize them. So they bought them 20 years to do this. But there's a cost to all this. Bush never got credit for his essential role in ending the Cold War on Western terms. So he was not reelected for a second term. But anyway, when it came time for Nobel Prizes and why the Cold War ended, Anatoly Adamyshin, this Soviet Foreign Service officer, said, look, it's difficult to deny the Soviet Union was the one that ended the Cold War. And Edwin Meese, who was a counselor to Reagan, also his attorney general, said, look, the Cold War began because of the Soviet policies, and it ended, in a sense, because of Soviet policies. And the Nobel Prize Committee agreed. They awarded the prize to Gorbachev, not to Bush, for his role in liberating Eastern Europe. So when you're thinking about this question of why Russia lost the Cold War, I hope you will come up with a more complicated answer than, well, Ronnie did it. That there are probably other causes at work as well. Anyway, thank you for your attention. That's what I have for you this evening.
So I've been trying to hire a writer for the podcast, but I ended up getting way more applications than I anticipated. But as I started to go through them, I noticed that many of them didn't feel like they were actually written and submitted by real human beings. So I started looking for a way to detect botted submissions, and I ended up using Sardine. Sardine was built to assess customer risk for banking and retail, but it's also useful for spotting fraudulent job apps. Implementation was hilariously straightforward. It took my general manager, Max, less than an hour to vibe code Sardine's SDK into our hiring flow. Now, Sarah, thank you so much for doing these.
Thank you for having me. That would be the more important thing.
There's an interesting question of why the Soviet Union collapsed when it did. I think the even more interesting question is why a system that was so centrally planned, monstrously inefficient, brutal, a colonial land empire, how such a country could survive for so long into the 20th century. So I feel like that's the thing that actually needs explanation. How did this regime last for 74 years?
But there are loads of dysfunctional places all over the planet that have been dysfunctional forever. And you look, well, why are they dysfunctional? And you look at, to me, the answer to that one, in a way, is the example of North Korea. You go, of all countries that should fall, a place that has ongoing famines in the 21st century, and it used to be the richest part of the Korean Peninsula. So these authoritarian regimes are really good at maintaining the coercive powers. But think about it. In order to educate someone, it takes years as a parent to bring up a little person, and then you get them educated, and maybe they're an A-list politician. It takes seconds to assassinate them. It's the asymmetry between construction and destruction. Destruction is so easy that these guys are dictators. Tend to be dictatorships are all over the world. It's a sad part of the human condition. They clearly know what they're up to. In the case of the Soviet Union, there were multiple intelligence organizations. That's what Stalin was using to keep track on everyone. So you want to monopolize information so that you know more information than other people. And then they have a whole bunch of people who are the winners of nomenclatura, are the elites there. You make sure you pay all them off. And I mean, think about it. Human society, slaves, serfs. I mean, we humans have been doing these things to each other for a long time.
So dictatorships can certainly sustain themselves for a long time, but the Soviet Union was special in that by the 60s and 70s, they have a GNP that's 60% of America's, this incredibly dynamic economy. In the 40s and 50s, they have much higher growth rates, so much so that prominent economists like Paul Samuelson are saying that by the 90s, based on what they're seeing at the time, the Soviet Union will have a bigger economy than America. And this is just quite surprising that they would have such high growth rates. If you just think about how central planning works, people are going to tell you how much steel you can make and which company gets to use the cotton fabric and cement and et cetera. And you have hundreds of millions of people living under the system. And it's just actually quite shocking that they actually had notable growth rates after World War II for decades on end.
Well, first of all, It's a war economy, essentially. You're putting all your money, so you have a big military, and Russians define greatness. This is part of it, of being a big power, and it's military power with territory. So, and most countries in wartime have, they mobilize for the military, right? This country did it in World War II. All kinds of rationing, right? We're not using market prices. You're setting different prices, giving people ration cards and things. The thing is about the Soviets is they kept it forever. They never got rid of it. So that's one piece. Another problem with the Soviet Union is all of the data. So I don't know what data you've seen, and I know the data I've seen is it's hard to know because the ruble's a non-convertible currency, and a lot of things they measure in weight and other things. Like they're the greatest TV producer in the world. They said, why? Because they made the heaviest TVs in the world, right? I'm serious. When I was there, this was it, and they would spontaneously combust, which is not the normal thing a TV should do for you, burn down the apartment building. So they're going to measure their heavy TVs as a positive, and the ruble is non-convertible. So there was a guy named Murray Feshbach, and I can't remember which part of the U.S. government he was, but he was really good at looking at their statistics and then adjusting them. But people didn't know, and I gave you the CIA ones, where the CIA, they're not stupid people. They've got the best data they could find, and they're coming up with 20% of the Soviet budget is probably devoted to the military. Then after the Cold War is over, they're going, whoops, we missed. It's at least double that, and maybe triple. So it's really hard to know, even with the statistics you're getting. Certainly what Paul Samuelson had wouldn't be accurate. It's just a guess.
But my favorite example of this is, so there were top-down commands that you got to produce a certain amount of steel, and a steel factory would then be incentivized to make thicker bars of steel rather than thinner bars because that would count towards greater production. Except a lot of inputs actually do require the thinner sheets. So then the other factories have to thin down the steel, but that also counts towards GDP. So producing the inefficient steel and then cutting it down to size is both being double counted towards GDP.
Oh, and just the whole waste of it. You're like the heavy TVs. They probably have 4 times the inputs that they need to make them. That would be good for other things. Yeah, it's this notion that you can actually plan an economy. Prices are a miracle.
Conservative niggers be like, we gonna fucking kill you, and then bring out Nicki Minaj on stage to twerk for Israel.
Why in the fuck is Nicki Minaj with Erica Kirk? So bizarre. Well, we're living in a weird timeline. Thanks for the donation, retard.
That referred to those influencers attacking that UFC fighters.
Oh, I see. Yeah. Yeah, they should have gotten beat up worse. Thanks for the donation, James.
Good old Adam Smith, the magic hand, right? Or the invisible hand, that was what it was. That prices are the way to go in markets. It's more efficient.
I wonder if one thing that's going on is in the early and mid 20th century, you have economies which are much simpler, at least compared to today. So even then, obviously, command and control is less workable than capitalism. But if you just have heavy industry, you need a certain amount of cement, steel, concrete, fabrics, coal. That's much more workable than like, we got to centrally command what SAS tools your enterprise is allowed to use.
Oh, yeah. Well, it's interesting on the development thing. So the communists have insisted on heavy industry. That's the thing that they want. Forget about the consumer goods. If you look at the countries that really have made it, like Japan in the Meiji Restoration, they're doing a lot of light industry and consumer goods. And then they move into heavy. But they've already got people on bicycles, and they got textiles and other things up and running. And that would also apply to Taiwan and Korea. And they do, by all means, they do get heavy industry. But that's not the starter program. The starter program is basic standard of living. And it turns out, and I don't know economists, but it turns out if you just look at who's rich and who's not, that seems to be the more workable thing.
Yeah. There's also the fact that the centralized regime is building things according to the 30s plan. And even after post-war Reconstruction, they're still calling back on these plans from the 30s that call for heavy industry for a bygone era. And in the 70s, 80s, we have our Rust Belt collapse of manufacturing. And people complain about this as, look, the U.S. has this hollowed out manufacturing base. But it's much better to have industries which are left behind so that the whole economy as a whole can be more dynamic and move on than the Soviet Union, where the entire thing became a Rust Belt, right? Because they couldn't move on.
It's more exciting than that. And again, I'm not an economist, but apparently they missed the plastics revolution, where, think about our own lives. Now we're finding out too many plastics, but plastic's an incredible material, and they're just missing that. I remember in Russia trying to figure out where to get sour cream and was being laughed at by Russians because I was so stupid in the store that I couldn't find it. Well, we have little plastic tubs with the sour cream. And back in the late 80s when I was there, you had to bring your glass jar with you so you could hand it over the counter so someone could take a filthy ladle and fill up your
Oh my god, that's disgusting.
jar. I mean, this is part of not having plastics. And then they totally missed the computer revolution, and that is this plays into Ronald Reagan winning the military race. Is we're putting these chips and things into our ballistic missiles, and they can't do that, and that's a problem.
Speaking of plastics, I didn't realize before preparing for this lecture the overwhelming role that oil played in first explaining why the Soviet Union was able to sustain itself for so long and then why it collapsed. So by the late 50s, Soviet growth rates are already starting to go down, especially compared to the post-war boom that America's experiencing. And in 59, they discovered these massive oil fields in Siberia.
Yeah, Jake Paul is not a good boxer.
And then from 73 to 85, I think, 80% of Soviet Union's hard currency earnings are just from oil. And they use this because central planning can't produce even grain, let alone advanced technology. They use this to import a bunch of stuff to sustain the Red Army, to sustain the population, to subsidize Eastern Europe. And then, of course, prices collapsed in 1985. Do you think that if the Siberian reserves aren't found in the late 50s, that it's possible that the Soviet Union would have collapsed 30 years prior?
I don't know, but they would have had, they wouldn't have been able to do all the Africa program and things. It just would be too expensive. So certainly it would have been a reduced thing. Well, it's also, it is also the gas reserves they got up. It's for like North Central Soviet Union. I can't remember the places, but this is the gas that used to get pumped to Europe because that's the better place. And they make those big investments and it takes a while for them to pay off. And that was a big deal because they needed help from Western oil companies or whatever, whoever does the gas pipelines, compressors, whatever it is you need. And there was a big to-do about that, about whether we should sell the stuff or whether we shouldn't sell the stuff. Europeans wanted to sell, we were trying not to. This was going under Reagan as well. But anyway, they had built a lot of it, and it was essential to their pocket change. But then when they got all the pocket change, they never saved any of it. They just, whatever the oil wealth was, they spent up to the max. Doesn't it sound familiar? Right? Governments, you have money, you spend it, forget about rainy days.
So after the Soviet Union collapses, there was a period when Putin was still winning somewhat free elections between, and then so if you look at the why Russia's economy recovers and why Putin is so popular in the 2000s, from 2000 to 2008, oil goes from $10 a barrel to $140 a barrel. And so this goes to your point about we give credit or blame to political leaders for often what are just long-run macro trends.
Well, what I didn't cover is when the Soviet Union collapses, Soviet living standards, just Russian living standards implode, and it's a mess for 20 years. It is just unbelievably difficult. Oh, and another piece of the brilliant Soviet management, in order to maintain control over the empire, instead of building things all in a place, you build some plane parts here, some plane parts there, some plane parts all over the empire. So when the empire goes, great, I've got a quarter of a plane, and then, where do I get the other parts? So all of that fell apart. So when Putin suddenly has a lot of money, and then he starts spending it on people, because initially there's plenty of money, Russian standard of living do go up. And so of course they like him and they give him credit for all of that. But then that runs its course, right? And then it's less good, and then he's more excited about, well, it's his mindset anyway. When you get more money, you want to get the empire back. And then Russians also like that, right?
Speaking of the empire, Russia's economy just has this terrible period after the collapse of the Soviet Union. A lot of the Eastern European satellites seem to recover in this gangbusters way. Obviously, East Germany, but even Poland today is such a big success story. What's going wrong with the mainland itself that these other countries are able to recover from communism much better?
They had been always much more connected to Western Europe. Czechoslovakia before the war is a full-up, highly developed country, absolutely tied to the West. Poland, I believe Copernicus is from a place like Poland, right? It's a center of the Enlightenment. But when I was using the George Bush Senior archives, it's fascinating. So it's 88, 89, when the Soviet Union's imploding. And then there's a lot of correspondence between Eastern Europe, particularly Polish leaders, coming to the Bush administration saying, hey, our banking system, we know it's a mess. Our financial system's a mess. We know we need expertise to help us figure out what our legal system is going to look like. And Bush is all over that. And I'm sure he farmed them out to the private sector, who would also be all over that, like giving them free consulting. And so as a result, you do have them really taking advantage of this 20 years. At the same time, when Bush would have loved to have given some of the same advice, and there were people like Jeffrey Sachs and others who went to the Soviet Union, but it was not remotely the same thing. This is people throughout Polish society requesting this advice, not like one guy with an office in Moscow. And basically, the Russians thought they knew it all. And they thought they understood. This is all the unknown unknowns, the things you don't understand, your blind spots. Truly, economics is a blind spot for the Soviets. Because think about it. When the Tsars ran the show, it's like a riff off the Mongol Empire of you take cuts from people's businesses of trade that comes through. And then it's also about selling basic commodities. It's not, you're not thinking of under the Tsars, Russia doing high-end manufacturers. I mean, I guess Fabergé and some jewelry if you want to do that. But really, that's not it. And so it doesn't have this commercial being tied into this commercial tradition of Western Europe and all the sea routes for trade. And so then when you get the communists, they aren't about that at all. So there's really a dearth of knowledge. Or think about in this country with all the little kids selling lemonade, right? You see them on the streets. They're already or the kids who are doing newspaper routes. They're already learning about buying things, selling things at a and we just take this knowledge for granted. It's just absent. It was absent in the Soviet Union, and not as much absent in Eastern Europe that had been more connected in.
Okay, so I should ask before we get to the period of Russian collapse. Let's go back to the end of the Soviet period. Gorbachev starts instituting these economic reforms along with Glasnost and Perestroika. But what I find mysterious is those economic reforms not only fail to prevent the stagnation that the Soviet Union is experiencing, but they in fact make things worse. So you would think that reform, even if it's handled badly, would have some sort of positive impact. And if you do it badly, then it'll have a smaller positive impact. But here it just like causes this huge hyperinflation, causes all these problems. So why did reform have this backwards impact?
Well, there's so much that needs reforming there. But part of it, I think, because he wanted to do political reforms, that's what he understands. As a human being, that would be the thing that he's very familiar with. Think about it. He's like an A-list member of the Communist Party. To be the guy when they do generational change, he's the one. So he's obviously very astute at that level. But the problem is economics. So he's giving away political power before he's fixed the economic problems. And so China's conclusion is, there is no way you're going to touch political power. They're going to hang on to that and then deal with whatever, as much of the economics as they're going to deal with. But that's part of it. But part of it is there's no tradition for all of these things. And then you go, well, how did Russia get this way? Well, it's very difficult to address. Prior to the Industrial Revolution, it's flat. Neighbors all invade. And so you needed a big army in order to defeat them. Okay, a big army is going to want a war economy, right? Historically, you're going to want to support a big land force. And that's going to, I mean, this is my take, and others who are actually experts in these various periods of Russian history can come up with something else. But I think it's you're channeling your economics into that. Whereas you're looking at Europe, and particularly Britain, it's merchants. They got a big aristocracy who are not going to dirty themselves with buying and selling stuff. But there are a tremendous number of very rich merchants in Britain that are going to influence government laws and things, which is not going to take place. And then what's nice about the Navy for Britain is you send them away. They're not going to run a coup in the capital because they're off on the ship somewhere. And there aren't that many of them compared to a standing army. So I suspect, I can't prove this, that this leads to different outcomes or contributes to.
One theory I heard of that is complementary to your theory is that Gorbachev is instituting reforms because he thinks there should be decentralization and democratization, but he doesn't fundamentally believe in the market system. So he's delegating power to these quasi-firms. At the same time, he thinks the price system is immoral, private property is immoral. So they can't intermediate between themselves using real prices. So then how do these firms intermediate? Well, there's corruption, right? If you can't use actual prices and property to figure out who gets what allocation of scarce resources, it's just back from dealing, which makes the problem worse.
Well, there's no legal system, and you need a legal system. And legal systems take a long time to develop. So you're telling the Soviet Union, okay, communism is down, and now you need we need a fast, we need a new legal system. It's not going to happen.
Okay, so you were mentioning the problem that Eastern European countries especially had, which is that they're going more and more into debt because they're not able to produce globally competitive exports. And in order to, so they have this like last ditch effort that we're gonna solve our problems with some technological miracle. We need to get even more over leverage. We'll get some Western machinery or technology, and then we'll be able to finally produce something that the world wants. I'm curious up to what point this was a plausible hope. Through the 80s and even till the end of the 80s, they still believe that, Czechoslovakia or East Germany or something could catch up with West Europe.
They're desperate, right? Think about it. If you're a communist leader, how many other cards are there to play? You're looking, okay, this is the only card I got. And they're doing other things because of the social unrest. They want to import food and consumer products because they've been so neglected these things. So, and then there's another piece, which is VCRs, the videos. All of a sudden, those things came around. I remember, so we're in Soviet Union, the academic year of 1988-89, and had one of my classmates had been an English language tutor of this person in Moscow and set me up because that was the only way to get a good meal once a week. I would do for a meal. I would talk English for an hour, and what that family wanted more than anything else was a VCR player, and they had a diplomatic. You could have hard currency and buy at the diplomatic whatever it was. So I basically got them a VCR by going to the diplomatic thing with my very limited foreign currency, bought an overpriced VCR for them, and they got all kinds of meals for the rest of the year. But it meant that they could all of a sudden get Western movies. And there are things like in movies where, like there'll be a picture of, a fugitive running by, the fruit section of the Berkeley Bowl. And the Russians would be, it's unbelievable. I think that Raisa Gorbachev's wife, when she came and visited, she must have realized that a welfare mother on food stamps had better buying power than she did by just being able to have access to Walmart. Right? Yeah. I think the elites, as they're traveling, I have no statistical data on this, but as you travel, it's like I'm comparing me getting sour cream in a jar, and that was the other thing, counting up all the things in a Soviet supermarket. And the total was something like 77 items total in this supermarket. I don't think that compares favorably to a candy rack as you leave, a 7-Eleven, right? And when you went by the meat section, the smell just about knocked you out of rotten meat. It was really disgusting. I got really good at making borscht, go to the peasant market, pay hard currency for bones, because couldn't afford any meat, but I could afford the bones. And then would buy, the Russians produce really good sugar beets, got beets, and then you're starting to get rotten apples over the winter, but they at least come from Hungary. Russians only produce apples in those days, but Hungarians did. And the Romanians provided the canned tomatoes, and I could do a credible borscht. But you're talking about, this is Moscow, the center of everything. And we're dealing, I remember buying potatoes at the market, and the rotten spots felt gelatinous. So you'd have to cut those out. And then you're wondering how many nutrients are in the rest of that potato. It was a really gross year. And then, I remember going to the candy store, and I I'm just not, I would buy caramel from Poland or somewhere. It was like a food item because it was actually edible.
At this point, I bet you were wondering why you didn't write a biography of Napoleon, and so you could just visit Paris instead.
Yeah, well, my brother's comment is you're studying Russia and China.
Dude, why would she even bother going?
2 countries in the breakdown lane.
By the way, the point about the grocery stores having 74 items, it's interesting in 2 ways. One, central control works much better if you have a much smaller amount of items to optimize over. So if things are standardized, it can work much better. And second, to your point about GDP being hard to compare between the Soviets and the United States, how do you compare a rotten tomato or a rotten potato to the Idaho ones that you can get?
They would have compared it by pound.
Exactly, right?
Yeah.
Oh, so you said you were there in 88 and 89. Yeah. So this is before the Berlin Wall has fallen.
I was watching Tiananmen fall, the Tiananmen demonstrations on Soviet TV, and the only reason you got that TV coverage is because Gorbachev was in Beijing. So all the press was there. That's why you have the coverage. And they stayed on because the students were demonstrating, and the Chinese closed society weren't aware of the power of television, of, guys, they're going to film you doing all of this stuff, and they will get the film out.
Okay, in 88, was the mood, obviously things are going terribly, but did people realize that they're only 2 years away or 3 years away from the complete dissolution of the Soviet Union?
Well, maybe the end of the Soviet Union, but there was such optimism of thinking, we're finally going to be a full-up democratic country, it's going to be wonderful, with no sense of the work schedules that go into a capitalist economy. That to create the wealth in this country, a lot of people are working far more than 40 hours a week, right? And particularly as they're getting started, working enormous hours. And that was not something that was in most people's mind. I mean, sure, the kids who became the ballerinas in the Bolshoi are working long hours to do that. But as an economy as a whole, they didn't understand the source of wealth and had any inkling of all the things that are missing, not least of which is no one's got the right education. Great, you got Marx memorized. That does you zero good.
So around this time is when people are finally learning about what actually happened during the Stalinist period.
Oh, yeah.
So people are optimistic that, well, we can sort of have a changing of the guard and maybe things will improve. But at the same time, they're learning about how terrible their history actually was. So between these two things, and also, at some point, they must realize through the 90s that things actually aren't improving. In fact, they're getting worse.
Oh, it fell apart.
Yeah. So what is the inflection point at which the mood is just
I don't know, because I wasn't living there. I was thinking that there would be impending problems as a, I don't know, Chicken Little American. The sky is falling, right? Americans always think disaster's coming. I sort of fit in that crowd. But I think there was a lot of optimism and exuberance, thinking we have the freedom to really understand our history and what's happening. This is in of educated people with college degrees in Moscow and St. Petersburg. Now, what's going on in the rest of the country is undoubtedly a different story, because they had, as bad as living in Moscow was, living in the countryside was going back in time far further. So those people weren't living well at all. Yeah. And it's going to get really bad for them.
Okay, so people are learning about these things for the first time. Is the sense that they kind of suspected, I mean, people have family, they must have known my uncle was, he was off in this little mining town that he was forced to go to for a decade right there after World War II.
Yeah.
But, so were they totally shocked, or was there some sense that things were pretty bad and now we're just learning the extent to it?
Oh, I think there was an understanding it was terrible, but I think there's this exuberance of thinking it's going to get much better. And then the disappointment is equally extreme. And then there was this feeling that, well, the West owes us, because that you're all really rich and you now owe us to fix everything. And the counterargument to that is, no, you are enormous migraine. You set back all of these countries across the globe back in time with this non-functioning communist model that you peddled around there, and now you want extra aid. And the problem was, I think we wanted to do some of the aid, but they're not going to be receptive to it. I think that was another conclusion with the Bush administration, is that if we dumped a lot of money in it, would just go straight into corruption. That you need a legal structure and in order to place money, and they just plain didn't have it. That was another thing that was worrying the Bush administration. There's nowhere to put the money.
Okay, speaking of these different countries that the Soviets and the United States were competing for during the Cold War, you had this presentation where you say, look, Reagan alone didn't do this. But I wonder if the broader lesson is just like, nothing any U.S. president did in terms of foreign policy. That was all a sideshow. This tete-a-tete competition for, different third world countries. We're going to get Brazil, we're going to get Vietnam, we're going to get Algeria, etc. That just seems much less significant than the fact that liberal capitalism was more appealing and outproduced communism. So even if Brazil goes communist, this is not going to change the fundamental playing board here.
If you do not protect the liberal economies of Europe, you're not going to have anywhere to play the liberal economic game. And also Japan. And one of the reasons you feel that liberal economies work is you've got economic miracles going on in Japan, Korea, Taiwan, Singapore, and Hong Kong back in the day. So if you abandon those places, also in the Cold War, there was a tremendous amount of economic growth across the world, and particularly in the Third World. Why? Because in the past, if there's a civil war, whoever's losing either comes to us or comes to the Russians and says, help us. So whoever it is helps, and then the other side feels obliged to help, and then you're just destroying wealth ever more rapidly. And that was the Cold War was anything but cold in the Third World. Tens of millions of people died in these conflicts. So when you end that, all of a sudden they can start compounding growth. So there's a problem with allowing someone not countering someone who's going to impose communist systems all over the place. And communist systems are really good at putting dictators into power in a civil war situation. It's very effective. That's how Mao gets into power. And the problem is, okay, then they win the civil war, they're in power, they annihilate the opposition, but then it produces compounding poverty thereafter.
So there's this conundrum, and I genuinely don't know the answer to this, but in order to beat off these communist factions and guerrillas, we often, through the Cold War, had to support other dictators. And I think probably in many cases they were better than the communist alternative. It's just very hard to beat Pol Pot and Mao in terms of how terrible you can be. But obviously this was, in its own way, problematic. And even if we didn't have to support dictators, we had to alienate. You had this previous lecture that you gave on the Indo-Pakistani chapter in history, where we had to alienate India in order to fend off against the Soviet Union in this little episode. So I mean, I don't know what the solution to this is. I mean, if you think that this theater mattered less, then you could say, well, we should have just kept our hands clean of these different third world countries. But to your point, well, if you want to be able to show that these countries can experience growth under capitalism, then you want them to not be under the subjugation of communists. But then you got to support sometimes objectionable regimes.
Well, I think you had a more optimistic generation. Ironically optimistic. The people who had survived World War II, there was a real generosity. I mean, American servicemen and women, but when I say servicemen, they were welcomed all over Europe, and they were adored in Europe, right? And they came back. They were a very generous group of people. Others felt generous to them. That's when the GI Bill just passed and saying, okay, you've saved everyone, so therefore we're going to give you college educations, extend home loans to you, not to African Americans. They were excluded from this, which is a problem, but others, white Americans, weren't. And it led to massive economic growth where people who'd never had a college education in their family, they did. And they all of a sudden, instead of having really hard manual labor, this real optimism. And then it extended to foreign countries. This is when this country was tremendously generous to others. And it worked very well for us. And think about the Marshall Plan. It looks really generous, putting all this money into Europe. We made a fortune off of it, as did Europe. If you're smart, you're looking for win-wins of things where you both benefit, because that'll incentivize the other side to join in. This is basic strategy. And this is one of the reasons I've got problems with the United States' turn to zero-sum approaches, where I'm going to get everything, you get nothing. And then I look so smart when we do the clickbait on this moment where I get everything and you get nothing. It's much smarter. And then the other piece is that a lot of things don't pay you off immediately. So George Bush is not reelected president. He absolutely deserved to be, because what he did, the payoff was huge, ending the Cold War on Western terms. But it doesn't pay off in time for the next election. I think this is where Americans miss it, is you're looking at what someone does on a given day when the real implications are what's going to happen in a decade. Like on tax policy, if we keep racking up our debt, it may get us out of the corner today, but is it going to really back us into a corner later on? Mm-hmm. And this is where Americans need to think a little harder about long-term implications of things.
I thought when you pointed out...
Kid Boo donated $2. Let me see.
Of Gen Z said that they'd marry an AI companion. Yes, marry. This isn't just about loneliness anymore. We're forming emotional connections with code. We're falling in love.
As if that's any more stupid than falling in love with a woman. Just some fucking dumbass. Who cares? Thanks for the donation, Kid Boo.
That it would cost 60 billion Deutsche Marks for West Germany to pay Gorbachev to basically let him, or not let him, but let East Germany join West Germany. That's a lot of money. But if you think about decades and decades of future growth, it's a huge bargain, right? So yeah. It's a mistake to think about how expensive things seem at the moment. It's just like another huge country that you've turned.
Well, there's a statement that politicians think of the next election, statesmen think of the next generation. George Bush and Helmut Kohl are statesmen. They're thinking of the next generation. And the group that fought World War II, also many of U.S. and also Allied leaders were statespeople. They're thinking of the next generation. Or if you're thinking of them, where I've got Mitterrand, who's negotiating the Maastricht Treaty about the European Union. That is statesperson's work of what's the next generation. So it's important. Yeah. And we haven't held our political, it's been, we need more statespeople,
okay,
more political leaders.
To try to different thesis on you.
Yeah.
Through this period, the Soviet Union is also trying to buy off other countries, especially when it thinks its economy can grow, and especially when after the 73 oil crisis, oil prices just skyrocket. And this is why some Soviet citizens remember the Brezhnev era favorably. It's just that oil made it possible for the Soviets to not only import stuff, but also through the Brezhnev Free, actually there's a net export of resources to Eastern European satellites rather than the other way around.
That's probably their data. You know, I get it. Their oil really subsidized, but everything in the Soviet Union that was worth having came from somewhere else. The problem is how do you measure it, right? And they're just going to measure it by weight or something else. It doesn't really capture what they're getting.
But the larger question being that it's not like the Soviet Union didn't think of doing things like the Marshall Plan. Obviously nothing to that extent, but this idea that you can win people's favors by providing them military aid, providing them foreign aid, it's just that they didn't have the resources to do it to the extent that the U.S. could.
That's true, but there's a real coercive piece too. Is if you mess with them, it'll be really ugly.
Economics is such a big part of the story of why the Soviet Union fell apart that if you don't look at the numbers, you progress from it. And it did it perfectly. Of course, oil wasn't the only reason to read if it's just on screen for a few seconds. So again, we just have arms control advocates will make this. So here's what I don't understand to get started. All right, back to Sarah. Okay, here's what I don't understand about the arms buildup during the Cold War. So the Soviet Union is spending, I think, 2% of their GDP just on nuclear weapons alone at its peak. And arms control advocates will make this quip, which is that, look, we've already got enough weapons to destroy the world many times over. Why do we need more? But that is sort of an interesting question. What was the point of spending so much of GDP on the marginal nuclear weapon or marginal weapon system?
I don't know the answer, but I've read you read the plans about these things and you wonder what people are thinking. Like we were trying to develop tactical nukes. There was only a little trick with that whoever deployed it would be within the blast range of the tactical nuke. And you're going, oh, who develops a weapon like that? Apparently we did. Luckily we didn't deploy it. I don't know the answer of why we had such massive redundancy in these nuclear weapons, why the arsenals were so massive. And I don't know the story on how you maintain these things and how long they last.
Wall Street Journal did a big investigation and turns out Putin literally directed the FSB to get Witkoff installed as Trump's envoy to Russia, which they did through Saudi real estate channels. Witkoff has denied numerous offers from CIA to be briefed on Russia. Sigh.
Did that just get published? How did I not hear about this? It's undeniable. There's very obviously Russian infiltration into the Republican Party. And Trump and Witkoff, there's no explanation for how they're acting other than they're Russian agents. Yeah. Yeah, and Witkoff denied numerous offers from the CIA to be briefed. I wonder what Witkoff, I wish I had, Professor Xavier mind-reading powers so I could, know why the fuck these people are doing this. It's just so bizarre. What's in it for them? Thanks. Thanks for the donation there, retard.
And it doesn't make much more sense to me than it does to you.
Okay, another question. So Sino-Soviet split, this huge diplomatic coup where the Soviets have to put 1 million soldiers on the Siberian front against China, and they have to spend 2% of GDP just stationing and garrisoning this area, which is obviously a lot. That's often what many countries spend on defense as a whole, let alone just along one front. At the same time, 2% GDP, well, if they just had 1 or 2 more years of extra economic growth or faster growth, that could make up for this huge diplomatic coup. So again, this goes back to the question of, if some domestic policy just caused slightly higher economic growth rates, that would make up for the biggest diplomatic coup of the entire Cold War, which goes back to the economy first, diplomacy second.
Well, I have real problems with the statistics, and I can only, this is, I got a, sample size of 1. Mwah. So I remember living in Moscow. It was so.
She is full of crap.
Who's full of crap? Thanks for the donation, James.
Backwards. It's just breathtakingly backwards in just about every way imaginable. From just, yeah, they got a big fancy subway system, looks remarkably retro, and yeah, at least it works. But the consumer goods were so awful, the quality was so bad. You look at the buildings themselves. I get it. They make nuclear weapons. Do they make anything else? Their cars were a joke. Their Ladas or whatever they were. It's just thing after thing. And so
Ladas are fucking genuinely hilarious.
You're looking at all their stats because that's what they are telling you, that we're so great. And it really is an emperor wears no clothes moment. That finally the little kids goes, oh, you're actually naked. Mm-hmm. Or I can give you an example. These acquaintances in Moscow were talking about hospitals outside of Moscow that some of them didn't have running water. How do you have a hospital without running water? I don't even know how that's even conceivable. Or when their kid had put her hand through, I don't know, glass door or something, and they wanted to get her stitched up because she's bleeding, not going to die, but she's probably bleeding all over the place. And they bring her to one place and, they got no thread to do the stitches. So then they have to go to another place. Who runs a country like this?
All right, you convinced me. BART is acceptable. I'll stick here. The subway's not a big deal. I don't want to move to Moscow. Okay, so while the Eastern European satellites are trying to leave the Soviet Union, this has happened many times through the 20th century, right? So Hungary in 1956, Czechoslovakia in 68.
I feel like I might have to poo soon.
Poland through Solidarity. And every previous time, there's a many million person strong Red Army stationed in Eastern Europe left over from World War II, which rolls in the tanks and prevents these revolutions from taking place. So what happens in the late 80s and early 90s that the Red Army's still there. There's still millions of Red Army soldiers. They just don't shoot.
Yeah, generational change. The leaders don't have the stomach for it anymore. I don't know how you'd feel about sending tanks and going, oh, we're going to splatter all these people. I think for many Americans, that would not be the choice that they would make. And so this ruthless generation is gone. Another piece is Gorbachev had traveled, and I think he had some Czech friends, and I can't remember all his list of friends, but they've been horrified by Czechoslovakia in 1968 as young people watching, as Russian young people watching it, and thinking, it's just wrong. We shouldn't be doing this. If communism is what it should be, this is not what should be happening. And so this is of their youth, Gorbachev and his, it's not just him, he reflects a whole generation of communists. And so they're thinking, there's got to be another way. This is just not right. And so then he thinks he's got his other way. And so it's this exuberance of the reforms and things are happening in Russia. There's a tremendous feeling of energy. And so he's telling the Poles, you get at it too. We're all going to do this thing. But it's all the expertise and things that he's missing, that he's unaware that he's missing, as are all these other people, because how could they have it? They've been living in a command economy.
Okay, this is what I wanted to ask you about. So you had the Tocqueville quote about how revolutions happen when governments start to institute some kind of reform. Gorbachev is doing perestroika, glasnost, and there's the conservative reactionary parts of the Communist Party, which, by the way, is a phrase I wouldn't expect to have said, but they're trying to resist this. And so Gorbachev goes about dismantling the party secretariat and instead devolving power down to the individual republics. And we know what happens later is that these republics are say, look, we want our own country now. But this raises the question of, okay, if you do inherit a brutal regime and now you say, I want to do reforms, and you know this dynamic that de Tocqueville pointed out, which is as soon as you start reforms, actually what tends to happen is that you lose power, not that people consolidated under you. What actually should you do, right? Because you're like, I want to improve people's lives, but as soon as you try to do that, the whole thing's going to fall apart.
This is so far above my pay grade. I mean, I'm a professor. I have trouble justifying a B+ on a paper. And so, I'm a believer in gradual reforms, do it incrementally. And for the Soviet Union, it would be gradual legal reforms, work it through their Duma slowly, and do it that way. But seek out help from the European Union that has many, many experts that would be overjoyed if Putin and friends would cease doing their number on Ukraine. And now the problem is you're going to get into reparations for what the horrors they've inflicted. So that ship has sailed, sadly, for this generation. There's no nice ending for Russians. It's too late. But you can look at Europe itself is improving its institutions, and Ukraine's improving its institutions. If you think about what forces you to change, isn't the existential threat on Ukraine, if they survive all this, this is forcing them really to clean up their institutions. So it's happening.
Is like 25 seconds.
Oh, no, I'm good, man. Oh, I'm a Snickers fan, huh? Oh, man. I used to not be a fan. I used to hate Snickers, but yeah, I'm a different man now. Yeah, every time I was a kid on Halloween, I used to get Snickers. I used to be like, ew, Snicker! You know? Wow. And I ain't do that shit no more. I think all talking about us are the same, man. I don't discriminate.
Link to article is too long, but here's the highlights. After Witkoff finished his 6th round of meetings with Putin, a Russian company sent him home with 11 pounds of red caviar.
The fuck? Vladimir Putin was interested in meeting Witkoff, so interested that he might consider releasing an American prisoner to him. Russian president has been studying psychological profiles of the officials around Trump, including Keith Kellogg. Trump named as America's envoy. Putin's intelligence agency reports stress that Kellogg's daughter ran a charity in Ukraine. Red flag signaling might be hostile to Russia, Russian demands. Shrugged off an appeal from television personality Tucker Carlson. 10 months later, Kellogg's out, and Witkoff, Dmitriev, two businessmen with strong personal connections to their respective presidents, are sketching a new economic and security order for Europe. When was this? Okay, so this was published fairly recently. Oh my god. Prisoner in question was Mark Fogel, high school history teacher, serving a 14-year sentence in the Rabinsk penal colony for carrying cannabis medically prescribed for his chronic back pain. Oh, bro. U.S. Embassy School in Moscow, Pennsylvania native, had taught the children of several U.S. ambassadors. Sending message to Witkoff could bring Fogel home. Kellogg later learned from a reporter that Kremlin had complained to the White House about his daughter's support for Ukraine. If he ever writes another book, he joked, he might put Russia's compliment on the cover. Some of this is fucking insane. CIA offered to brief Witkoff. He declined. Nor was he accompanied by an interpreter. Being told that Russia's president wouldn't allow him to bring another person into the meeting. Jeez. Putin hosted Witkoff, took notes. As president, gave a lecture on the 1,000-year history of Russia. This is bizarre. This is like he's like literally Tucker Carlson. Putin was assessing whether the man in front of him was as open to the Russian perspective as his profile suggested. Sent him home with 11 pounds of red caviar. In fact, it was a mid-tier brand of roe that the company now wants to market as Trumpovka. What the fuck? Yeah. So that's fucked. Well, at least we got confirmation.
Discriminate no more. Now I eat a Snicker for breakfast, I eat a Snicker for lunch, I eat a Snicker for dinner. Snicker. You know, one time I found a Snicker on the back of a bus. I looked at that shit, I said, what? Who would leave a Snicker on the back of the bus? A Snicker.
Okay, thanks, Frank Giuffano.
Rapidly there, but we don't know the end of that story, how it ends.
I do think there's an interesting lesson here. Whenever we look at a country from the outside, we have this thing of like, well, just reform everything and just fix your economy. And whenever we understand the system better, for example, in the United States, healthcare is 20% of GDP. And this idea that Trump or Obama or Biden, whoever could just come in and be like, well, I'll just fix healthcare. We recognize that this is a wildly implausible thing to happen. But then we have this expectation that in Russia, Gorbachev or Yeltsin could have just been like, this is 100% of my economy is messed up, and I'm just going to fix it.
American hubris. In action, think about our country. We have one of the most crazy tax codes on the planet, and neither party can touch it.
Right.
Because you touch any part of it, someone negotiated that wording exactly. And yet, think of how much of our economy is taken up by the overhead of all the tax accountants, all the misdirected cash in order to take advantage of something that's simply an invention of the tax system. There was years ago when there was talk of doing a flat tax. Wouldn't that be much more efficient? And you can imagine what accountants thought about that one. And that idea has totally died. Talk about inefficiency. I mean, and then we realize we have budgetary problems in this country. And this would seem to be something that ought to be on people's radar is clean up tax code. But isn't it precisely that many people don't want the radar on the tax code? And that's why we're wondering who can get in and out of girls' or boys' bathrooms, right? Instead of looking at the tax code, which would be the real thing.
I think there should be big deductions for podcasts. It counts as research and development.
Well, Darkesh, you're almost at that stage. You need to add a lobbyist in D.C.
We'll work on it. So there's a very interesting...
It was a really weird laugh.
book about North Korea, I forget the title, where the author is pointing out that North Korea could not do... you couldn't even start doing reforms today because as soon as there was some sort of...
If you don't like the Supra, then what about the Corvette C8 or Jaguar F-Type? Yes, I'll get a unreliable car that's impossible to get parts for, that has worse performance, or I could get a car that has worse performance.
Information
and is more expensive.
That from the outside world that North Koreans could see, which would be part of any reform, they would immediately realize that everything the government has told them is false, that South Korea is enormously wealthier, they have this terrible standard of living. And obviously, this is the same experience that Eastern Europeans had. We're literally, in many cases, a country that is, this is the exact same country, it was just bisected in half, and the other half is living so much richer. And in those situations, I guess this goes back to the question of, well, can you, today in North Korea, how would it even kick off if Kim Jong-un just had a change of heart or if somebody else came into power? They're just probably trapped in this to the extent they want to keep power. There's nothing.
He's trapped because he's a dead boy if he tries to go on retirement. What is it in Asia? There's I don't know exactly all of the parts of Asia where this applies to. So some parts there's a thought that things last for 3 generations and then it's over. So he's the 3rd generation, and whether this is true or not doesn't matter. If you believe it's true, it will become a self-fulfilling prophecy. So I'll be interested. Well, I won't probably live to see it. You in the room will, of what happens to the Kim family, whether it makes it to generation 4 or not. But by their own belief system, in theory, they shouldn't. So who knows?
One more question about oil.
Yeah. Based on my big expertise on oil. 0. Yeah. Okay.
During this period between 73 and 85, when they have these huge oil revenues.
How much to live in Antarctica for a year with no internet? I'd do it for at least $1 million.
Presumably there was some amount of exuberance, but did the government recognize and realize that, they're super fragile to the price of oil, and if that collapses, then they need some sort of contingency plan, some rainy day fund. Or you must notice that, like, oh, this is half my budget, and all of my foreign currency is coming from oil, and this is a very volatile commodity. Nobody noticed that?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. I was reading this long chronology that it was put together sort of early Putin, so before they really shut down all the information. It was just a chronology of the Cold War, big fat book. And just like someone like me to read a book like that. So I'm going date after date after date after date. And it's written by people who are really angry about how the Cold War turned out. And one of the takeaways from the compilers of this thing is they kept criticizing, they showed how much, for every year, how much Russia was making in oil revenues. It was huge. But in their analysis, it was, and they saved none of it, right? There was no sense of, invested in something. There's something called consumption. There's another thing called investment. Going around and buying a bunch of, I think, Western grain is consumption. There's none of this being put in anything that's going to yield anything. And so that was a big criticism of the authors of this book, is that the question you're asking is no, they just milked it while they were there.
Final question. This is not so much a question as an observation. I don't know if you have a reaction to this. If you just look at Russia's history through the 20th century, Tsarism to communism to collectivization to 10% more than 10% of your population dying from World War II, then back to Stalin, and then more communism, and then the economy collapses again, and then Putin, and then especially if you look at the satellite states, well, they had all of this happen to them and worse, and now they're getting invaded. Whereas you have other countries like Japan and Germany also had tragic histories, but then they recovered. The tragedy of Russia.
Yeah, you're lucky you're not Russia.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, no, it is tragic. Yeah. It is tragic, and it started out as a difficult address in pre-industrial revolution that required certain things to survive, and they were more ruthless than their neighbors. That's how they did survive. I mean, in a previous lecture, I discussed how they wiped out entire princely states and khanates and things, just wipe them out. And then you're using their elites because it's a rough neighborhood. And the problem is if you aren't on the winning side, you're going to be on the losing side, right? But since the Industrial Revolution, where you can do compounded economic growth that comes from commerce and trade and industry and things. So that's the real way to get powerful, because you get power that becomes a function of your wealth. That involves having legal systems, institutions, stability. And Russia has found it very difficult getting with that program. And it has to do with, I think, this very difficult historical legacy, who rises to power, and also all the missing things. They didn't have the Renaissance. They didn't have the Reformation, these fundamental movements that were very influential in the West. And so there's a lot of negative space of things that didn't happen. There's all the awful stuff that you saw that did happen, but then they're missing things. So it's very difficult. And then people like Putin can set the clock way back because he's killed so many Ukrainians. What he's done will take a generation minimum to get to anywhere where people are going to be thinking about, people will be talking about reparations from Russia for quite a while. And they're poor. They're not going to want to do that.
I should have thought to end on a more optimistic note, but...
Well, history's ended, okay?
Well, you outlined the ways in which countries can chart a better course for themselves, and that's where the optimism can come from.
Well, actually, I've told a story about the last Cold War. that stayed cold in the industrialized world, which was a good thing because it would have been nuclear. It was tragic in many other parts of the world, but at least it stayed cold in the industrialized part. And there was a strategy that a very thoughtful generation of people, not just in the United States, but all over the West, that put it together to allow for a non-nuclear landing for the Soviet Union when it fell apart. And I've laid out some of from this you can derive some of the strategies that worked for ending it that way. And these are the kind of strategies that we're going to have to use in order to navigate the second Cold War. And so the other piece about the Cold War is, okay, the Soviet Union's they're living miserable lives of their own making. But Americans were actually having a good time. They paid taxes, they had to pay for all the nuclear weapons. But as I recall, people are running around at Disneyland, they're doing their European trips, they're buying houses. And so actually, Americans, people in Western Europe, were actually living fulfilling lives while they're waiting out for others to get with the program. And that would be if we're going to make it through this second one, we need to start cooperating with our allies, building institutions, improving laws. Don't just burn down the house. And we will get through this one too. And we will live fulfilling lives while we're waiting out Putin to come up with something different, or Xi Jinping for coming up with something different. But if we blow through our good hand of cards, which involves having, so you interview all kinds of people at the cutting edge of technology. If we get rid of all of our university funding, so we aren't going to have the intellectual capital on which those businesses are based. If we're going to dump all our allies for unknown reasons and just alienate them so they organize without us. If we're going to just throw away entire institutions without thinking very carefully about what we're doing, it's called we become a cooperative adversary, and we will be the bozo putting a plastic bag on our own head. And I look at the rhymes here. The Soviets had this ancient leadership who just couldn't get their act together, and they're living off of debt instead of thinking creatively. Oh, the rhymes are awful, but we don't have to do it that way. So it is more optimistic, but we need to get our house in order, and that's why I'm doing these lectures. They're lectures in strategy to give you tools on how to come to your own decisions. That's your business, not mine.
Okay, that is an excellent note to close on. Sarah, I want to thank you so much for doing this lecture series with us. It has been a true education across D6, from everything from individual wars to the strategic and tactical decisions, which explain them, to the broader lessons for today's world. I do interview lots of different kinds of people, but from a sort of viewer minute average adjusted basis, I host a Sarah Payne podcast. If you just sort by popular, Sarah Payne comes up a lot.
But you've got it backwards. I was an unknown academic, and then you cold called me about doing an interview, and I said, sure. And Dwarkesh, as a result of all this, I'm getting emails from all over the place. So let's talk about who's grateful to whom. Anyway, I'm devoted to your generation.
Oh, look at my noodle. Hey, little noodle. There's my little cat noodle. I gotta get up. I gotta poop. You poop too, you know. I have to scoop your poop. We both poop. You poop in your cat box, I poop in the toilet. But we both poop and we both have butts. I love you. My poop cat. It's a good baby. You're so soft. Love you so much. You're so pretty.
Yeah, I think I'm gonna end the stream early. My neck is just fucking annoying the fuck out of me, dude. I think it might be a good idea to just lie down. But, fuck you to everybody who donated on Streamlabs. I mean, thank you. Hope you all had fun or learned something or whatever. This is a weird stream. Dodo, wanted me to react to this, so blame Dodo for this crap. Anyway. That was kind of interesting, but not something we normally watch. Yeah, I'll see you tomorrow. I'll see you all tomorrow. But nighty-night, sweet dreams.